and it's an honor and a privilege on behalf of the PEFA program to host the second day of the conference as we celebrate PEFA 20 years and beyond. To our distinguished panel of speakers and members of the PEFA Steering Committee, practitioners of public financial management, to all of you who are connected today, thank you for joining us. Yesterday, we had excellent participation and rich discussion, and we unpacked some of the critical issues on the role of public financial management in building green, resilient, and inclusive development, but at the same time in supporting recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. We also had discussion about the PFM priorities in addressing the current challenges and opportunities, including how to achieve the right balance between efficient, adaptive, as well as accountable and transparent PFM systems. Today, we'll discuss how PFM is responding to the current crisis, and we'll be more specific and we'll look into the lack of trust in the governments and climate change. As yesterday, the event is in English with simultaneous translation in French and Spanish. We'd love to hear from you. So please, ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome to use the chat function to pose all your questions and comments for the speakers. And we'll do our best to bring those into the discussion later on. We encourage you all to use Twitch as well as all the social media platform. Without further ado, allow me to open the second day of the conference. And I'm pleased to welcome in this section two distinguished speakers who will reflect on the global challenges of today. And allow me to introduce the first speaker, Toril Irene Pedersen, who is currently Deputy Director at the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation and heading the section for governance and transparency. She will be sharing with us some reflections on the key messages from the discussion during the first day of the conference. Toril, the floor is all yours, and please keep your intervention to no more than 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just start by thanking you for inviting me to share some of my thoughts and reflections from yesterday's session. And I'll try to keep my reflections as short as possible because I am, and I'm sure many of you also eager to get on with today's discussion and the program for today. I have to join, first of all, everybody in congratulating PEFA on the 20 years of continuous improvement and evolution in the service of PFM. Norway is a proud partner of this collaboration, and we're very pleased that the conversations yesterday and the one scheduled for today is focusing on looking ahead and finding new opportunities for PFM to remain relevant and useful to the emerging challenges that we're facing in the world today, and whether it's climate change or the global pandemic and other challenges. From yesterday's program, there were a few common themes that I'd like to just spend a few moments reflecting on. First of all, we were pleased to see that some of Norway's main policy priorities are also the shared priorities of many of the partners and the speakers from yesterday, addressing climate change, promoting gender equality, and fighting against the growing economic inequalities. On climate change, I appreciated really the insightful reflections that were presented on the intersection between PFM and climate change. It's clear to, I'm sure, all of us in this meeting that we cannot afford to not include climate change into fiscal policies. And it was also said yesterday that the climate change is a severe macroeconomic challenge. And hence it needs to be moved to the core operations of ministries of finance. That is, if we're to take decisive actions and be part of the solution. The focus on how to address the growing inequality challenge here we heard Erica representing the European Union mention yesterday how PFM is key for reallocating resources and to implement the principles of social solidarity, resource sharing in order to fight the inequalities. This is very much aligned also with our priorities in Norway, and I was pleased to see it was reflected on in many different ways throughout the presentations. And then thirdly, on the policy side, using PFA to better understand the challenges related to gender equality and as a better position for policy debate and discussion and decisions. On the operational side, there were also some points that resonated with me. It was mentioned on more than one occasion that the diagnostic tools, of course, is not an end game. Let me just look at some of the lessons that were shared on this topic. The utility we see of PEFA is helping countries develop PFM reform action plans and working towards achieving development objectives. So it is a step in a longer process, but it's also a step that can follow many of the stages of the development process. It was mentioned by Minister Tusabe yesterday that you can find a PFM indicator under PEFA for almost every SDG, so there is no need to reinvent the wheel. This is also a testament to the utility. Another point that was reflected on by many is the importance of seeing the whole system. Breaking down silos and fostering collaboration between government institutions, but also with accountability stakeholders is important. And bringing revenue actors and sector specialists into the broader PFM reform dialogue is critical. Everyone in the PFM ecosystem must do their part for it to function efficiently. This was mentioned by Takani Maluleki yesterday. All players have to work together. Fragmentation does not achieve efficiency or efficacy, which I thought was a very insightful way of presenting these points. Now, on two interrelated points, it was the focus on capacity challenges was highlighted. Though PFA might highlight some of the capacity deficiencies, it is important that that there is partnerships to make sure that the capacity support is predictable and long-term. Again, a quote from Takani Maluleki yesterday. She said, PFM demands that capacity building is an ongoing in the public sector and the Supreme Audit Institution, despite the resource constraints. And as development partners, we must be responsive to these kind of statements and make sure that we are that we create partnerships for the long run. But it's also related to another point that was mentioned by, among others, Laila Sbai and Carolina yesterday, that it takes time to build PFM systems, and it's particularly challenging in some countries where there is political instability. So going forward, we need to take these kind of different country contexts more into consideration when we adapt the partnerships under this framework. But focusing on learning also builds credibility. And the way we've seen the PIFA and the PFM community changing from a top-down process, focusing on control, to now focusing on more publicly available data and dialogue is, I think, the way to build credibility and partnerships for the future. So finally, and maybe one of the most important points that stood out from the presentations and the discussions yesterday is the point of how the need for country ownership and political will at the country level. I think this was echoed by all speakers, and it's something that we also want to a position that we really support from NORAD and from the Norwegian government side. It's essential to foster inclusive and constructive environment focusing on the needs and showing the path from the diagnosis through the range of policy options and finally supporting the implementation of the reform agenda. So me, for one, I'm very excited to follow the rest of the program today. We learned a lot from yesterday, and we appreciated how we could shift from very specific experiences to the more higher level technical discussion. So we look forward also to today's program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Toril, for your intervention and for so well summarizing the main discussion and the takeaway from yesterday. So allow me to invite the second distinguished speaker in this session, Martin Polloni, who is currently Director General of the International Relations Section at the Ministry of Finance of the Slovak Republic. So he will be sharing with us some reflections on the future of public financial management. What are the main challenges, the opportunities ahead, but also when it comes to the role of the PEFA program. The floor is all yours. Please keep your intervention to no more than 10 minutes. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much. So dear partners and experts, dear colleagues, Slovakia is a proud PEFA partner, and we are delighted to be here today to celebrate this PEFA's unique journey. Looking back 20 years ago, PEFA program was established as a means to provide a standard methodology for diagnostic of public finance management, with the ultimate goal to strengthen the financial systems and promote more coherent and effective approaches to reforms. Today, PEFA and its objectives remain more relevant than ever. In spite of all the progress achieved over the years in reforming the PFM systems, the ongoing COVID-19 health crisis unveiled the many weaknesses that still persist. On the other hand, it has also helped us to see how well-functioning PFM systems can provide a vital support in addressing the socio-economic challenges we are and we will be facing. The most imminent challenge in tackling the crisis, at least in my opinion, is the trust in governments, who are caught in actually balancing between sustainability in medium and long term and the need to finance costly measures to limit the impact of the crisis today, now. The trust in governments is a key ingredient in the effectiveness of public policies, but ultimately the whole economy, it goes all the way down to individual decisions, such as whether to get vaccinated or not. The trusted governments are usually those with fair, open, and accountable PFM systems, where decisions on allocation of resources are based on transparent and known criteria, where procurement and contracting are less susceptible to inefficient or corrupt dealings, and thus more likely to obtain the value for public money. Therefore, when targeting to build trust and boost the credibility of the public institutions, we are right to focus on allowing a greater transparency, participation, and scrutiny in the public finance processes. If I can share a bit of our own experience, in Slovakia, we are just now working on increasing fiscal transparency. The aim is to further improve the engagement of the civil society and establish a tradition of open communication with the public. We named the program Citizens Budget, and it will explain the budget priorities, fiscal position, planned expenditures by sectors, savings measures for the given fiscal year in a comprehensive but understandable manner. On the local level, we want to further boost the dialogue with the citizens and promote accountability through participative budgeting. On the expenditure side, the obvious goals of our government, which was selected on an anti-corruption mandate, are in the soundness and transparency of the procurement and contracting, as well as auditing and control processes. These are clearly the essential determinants of what I understand to be public trust. Another worry is in Slovakia still is the financial sustainability, aggravated by the pandemics, but also long-term challenges such as population aging and, of course, climate change. So we believe that the prospects of financial sustainability can be remarkably increased by the quality of decision-making processes, namely through now adding more strategic vision of public expenditures, effective data-driven policy creation, better alignment between budget and policy objectives, and acknowledging PFM as a crucial instrument for addressing the global development challenges as well. So a joint endeavor within our ministry, but this is becoming more and more inclusive, is the medium-term budgetary framework. So we try to start planning a bit forward. So we see need an effective tool for a more strategic approach to planning. It will allow for strengthening the fiscal discipline through expenditure ceilings planned for 3 years ahead, while sufficient flexibility will be preserved also through the multi-year perspective for the state institutions to be able to respond to unexpected budgetary pressures. To avoid unintended deficit and increased debt, the budgetary framework should be backed up by agility in economic forecasting and policy evaluation. Constant work on improving the analytical tools is essential for governments to be able to estimate the fiscal impact of potential changes in economic circumstances. And standard approaches could be enriched with behavioral economic features, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. This could boost the analytical capacity. In order to maximize the effectiveness in public spending at all government levels, still in Slovakia, the governments have been using the concept of performance budgeting, which shifts the focus of decision making in budgeting away from inputs, so how much money does it cost, towards measurable outputs, what can be achieved with this money. So this is also a longer term ambition in Slovakia. We have established a specific analytical units which focus on ex ante value for money analysis of the critical public expenditures, as well as sectoral spending reviews as a tool to scrutinize expenditures and identify any potential for efficiency gains. So let us hope we will succeed in all of these our ambitions and contribute to both sustainability and citizens' trust, and ultimately the quality of public service delivery. So over the years, the public finance landscape throughout the world has been evolving rapidly, and it is inevitable for governments to make global challenges such as changing climate and decarbonization of the economy a part of the fiscal policy. The urgency and complexity of the issue requires holistic government approach driven by mainstreaming into the entire public finance area. And this is where PEFA remains immensely relevant for the government. Besides being able to ever more accurately capture the quality of the PFM systems, it has managed to keep up with the changing PFM landscape and address the most critical emerging issues. So PFA Gender and PFA Climate supplementary frameworks have been developed to assess the extent to which a country's PFM system is gender or climate responsive. PFA Climate, for instance, can provide a meaningful contribution to the global discussions on climate change mainstreaming, including to the work of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. The PFA assessment at the subnational level have become widely used, including modules focusing on how PFM performance supports an efficient public service delivery. A strong research agenda to promote advancement of knowledge on PFM has been complemented this year by the PFA Global Report, using PFA data to provide analysis and identify trends in PFM. Extensive outreach and learning is being provided by the initiative, leveraging on digitalization opportunities, as we will see later today during the launch of the PFA e-learning course. And I could go on, but let me conclude here by simply recognizing PFA's significant contribution to global PFM reform dialogue, as well as progress in PFM reform programs in many countries. And as we are preparing for the next phase of the program, we believe PFA will remain the PFM treasure, the trendsetter, in ever improving the trust, sustainability, helping to address the global development challenges, among which the climate crisis. Thank you very much and best of luck.
Thank you so much, Martin, for such a comprehensive response to quite a complicated question when it comes to the challenges and opportunities ahead, and very much appreciated for highlighting the achievement of the PFA program. So let's move to the next session, which brings together global leaders to reflect on the future. And the question that we are asking, and we will seek, their opinion to address, is how the PFM system can rebuild trust in the government. So allow me to introduce the chair of this session, Rosemary Schlup, who is the head of the Macroeconomic Support Division at the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs. So Rosemary, a real pleasure and an honor to have you with us, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm really delighted to be the moderator of this interesting session on the key issue of trust and public financial management. What is the role of PFM in rebuilding trust in governments that has been eroding? Often we see PFM as a technical process or a complicated system, but it has a key role for the functioning of our societies. I think at the very basic level, the question of PFM trust relates to the social contract between governments and citizens. Citizens are willing to pay taxes if they receive something in return. They expect the state to provide security, health, education, clean water, garbage collection, to name a few. So the glue that holds these pieces together and translates tax revenues into deliverance of public services are the institutions and processes. In essence, the PFM system. Furthermore, if money is wasted, or worse, embezzled, trust in governments is undermined. And as we know, without trust, no democracy can function. So we'll now hear from three very interesting speakers what they see as priorities to tackle the problem of trust through PFM. And with us are Harald Weiglein, the Director General for Economic Policy, Financial Markets and Customs Duties in Austria. He'll bring a government perspective to our conversation. Then we have Vivek Ramkumar. He's Senior Director of Policy at the International Budget Partnership, IBP. In his capacity, he oversees IBP's research and advocacy efforts to expand the adoption of transparent and accountable budget systems around the world. And we have Olusegun Onbinde. He's co-founder and director of Budget, Nigeria's civic organization. his organization has pioneered for getting budget information out to citizens in an understandable format through technology. I would like to ask all our speakers to be brief, to the point and frank, and also please stay within the 5 minutes because we don't have too much time. And during the talk, I'd also like to encourage everyone in the audience to make use of the chat function in order to engage in a discussion on the proposals by the speakers. So with this, I'm giving the floor to Harald Weiglein to hear about priorities to tackle the problem of trust through PFM from his point of view. Harald? Just trying to reform the question, so it's mostly targeted to your point of view. So, what is the most important thing for governments to do to address the accountability and trust gap through PFM systems? And will the governments be willing to take the necessary steps? And what do you think are the trade-offs? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. I would answer the question thus. I mean, trust always has a lot to do with credible and transparent communication, but not just about that. You also have to act in a way that doesn't disconnect with what you communicate. So, in other words, your words, your actions must be the same. And when it comes to public financial management, there are actually two levels there of trust which are relevant. There's the external level, where through your budget documentation, the entire governance system of the budgetary processes, you communicate with external stakeholders. These are most likely to be the investors that buy your government bonds, but they could also be credit rating agencies establishing the financial health of your country, or donors. And for them, they need to have a clear idea what you're doing with your budgets, what the priorities are, how reliable your figures are. And I'm saying this because you basically have two choices here. You can either be transparent and open, and then you'll get investors that are focusing on return only and will not try to meddle with your politics. But you can also be intransparent in your budget documentation. And then the only people who are likely to help you are likely to invest in your bonds or give you loans will be people who are not concerned with returns, but are more likely to be concerned with strategic and policy objectives, which may not be the same as your objectives. And you end up with loan contracts where you have strange event of default clauses like voting against political objectives of your lenders in international fora, or disclosing the loan to your electorate. I'm not naming any names, but I'm sure you will know what I'm referring to. So it's your choice. Which kind of stakeholder, external stakeholder investor you want to have. And it's also a question of national independence, if you ask me. Then, of course, there's the internal dimension where you communicate with your own electorate, where it's important to be transparent because your electorate wants to know where the taxpayers' money is going to, what it's used for, whether there is accountability, and whether public funds are going to the right priorities or whether they're wasted. And for that, it's very important to have a robust system of checks and balances. In Austria, there are so many institutions concerned with the budget. Of course, there's Parliament, there's the Court of Auditors. We're being very closely watched by rating agencies. There's also the independent fiscal institution. There's the European Commission and the draft budgetary program process the entire European semester. And that's good because financial information is open to interpretation. And when something's open to interpretation, you don't want to monopolize the opinion on that interpretation. So it's good to have the different viewpoints. and to have the public debate. Maybe to look a bit into the future, we're discussing the entire area of environmental sustainability, and here green budgeting is very important. But I think it's fair to say we're only at the initial stages of what green budgeting can look like. The problem here is, as much as we would like to think about greenery as a scientific concept, it's not. It's more a political concept. And you may, I don't know whether you follow the discussion in the European Union. One example of that is there's not really agreement on whether nuclear energy is green or not. And that shows you the kind of problem that you have when you enter into green budgeting, or aligning your budgetary process with the European Union taxonomy on sustainable activities. It's something that everybody can agree on at the political level, but when you come down to the technical details, it's much more difficult. In closing, let me mention another aspect that's important, and that's financial literacy. If you put out financial information to your electorate or to the public in general, of course, what you send is important, but it's also what's also important is the ability of your electorate, of the receivers, to actually understand that information. And that's an issue in many countries. It's also a huge issue in Austria. That's why we have engaged in a financial literacy program. We have just established an action plan with 41 actions that will be implemented over the next 5 years. This just goes to show this is not a problem that's only present in developing countries. It's also very much present in countries like Austria, in Europe in general, and also in the US. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harald, for this excellent contribution. Without further ado, let me move to our next speaker, Vivek. The question is, governments are falling short of managing their fiscal policy response to the crisis in a transparent and accountable manner. But the problem is not new. So how do we address this problem when public spending absolutely needs to deliver critical results and fast? Over to you.
Thank you, Rosemary, and hello, everyone. I'm so honored and pleased to have this opportunity to join you in celebrating the 20th anniversary of the PEFA program. I've engaged with the initiative for well over 15 years and know that it is a fabulous program that provides practical tools and resources on how countries can improve their public finance management systems. A key issue that we are addressing in this session is the role of PFM in rebuilding trust in government. As societies struggle to mend broken social contracts, transparent, inclusive, and accountable PFM systems can reconnect government and citizens in ways that promote everyone's well-being. Earlier this year, my organization, the International Budget Partnership, worked with civil society researchers in 120 countries to document the governance of fiscal policy packages introduced by their governments to combat the many consequences of the COVID crisis. Our assessment shows that more than 2/3 of surveyed governments are falling short of managing their fiscal responses in a transparent and accountable manner, thereby jeopardizing the effectiveness and impact of these crisis management efforts. Despite the overall gloomy picture, we also documented how some countries have chosen a different path and demonstrated that an urgent and speedy response to the crisis does not have to come at the expense of equity and accountability. For example, in Jamaica, the Auditor General conducted 3 near real-time audit reviews of the government's cash transfer program and identified vulnerabilities in the program. The move has reportedly already saved the country's treasury $255 million in payments that were slated to go to ineligible applicants. In South Africa, the Asivikelani initiative is enabling informal settlement residents in major cities to use SMS messages to report to the government on the services that they are receiving and how these services are falling short of their needs. The initiative has already secured improved access to water, sanitation, and waste removal services from municipal governments, affecting more than 1 million people in the country. In Ecuador, the government established an open procurement portal, which has been widely used by journalists and civil society groups to report discrepancies in the government's emergency procurement transactions. Importantly, the portal has leveled the playing field for small vendors, while simultaneously improving the negotiating capacity of government agencies that entered into contracts. Against this backdrop, I believe that there are at least 3 ways PFM systems can be made more accountable and thereby enhance public trust in government. First, governments need to be told that when a crisis hits, it's in everyone's interest that decisions are made and implemented in an open and inclusive manner. When the public has a say, governments can fill information gaps and make better decisions to ensure relief reaches those who need it most. When auditors and legislators have the independence and mandate to monitor implementations, governments can course correct if assistance is not meeting its targets. When speed and accountability are pursued together, the public gets better services, which builds confidence that government can deliver. Second, the standard bearers of public finance management practices, many of whom have gathered to celebrate the PEFA program today, need to join hands with other influential voices and civil society activists to emphasize the need for accountable PFM systems at high-profile global, regional, and national venues. We should not accept the urgency created by the crisis as an excuse for wasteful and inefficient management of scarce public resources. And finally, we need to widely share good practices being followed by countries so that governments have critical information and resources to implement reforms. Donors should convene multi-stakeholder processes to develop and adopt international norms and standards on managing fiscal policy in times of crisis. They should also support country-led efforts to publish more information about what they are spending and the impact of these expenditures, and they should facilitate oversight by legislatures, auditors, and citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivek. Let me now turn to our third speaker, Oluseun. Budget. Nigeria does a lot of work at the subnational government level to enhance the transparency of public finances, more specifically than by translating complex budget data into accessible way. How can governments use PFM tools and mechanisms to rebuild trust, or can they? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thanks so much. And it's a pleasure listening to all the speakers and also to be part of PEFA 20. I would say that, and I enjoyed that Vivek made the last statement, and that statement comes from a period of a pandemic. It's not an opportunity to also put burden on the citizens or to also abuse public resources. And I guess that if there was a time to really redefine trust and rebuild trust, the pandemic provided a significant opportunity for the government, because the whole essence of state contract is that citizens and the government all have mutual responsibilities within the state, and the citizens pay taxes, but they also expect that in an emergency, in a pandemic, in a crisis, the government should stand up for them. What we have seen in most environments that we work in West Africa and across Africa, is that abuse and misappropriation and of the PFM structure continued even during the pandemic. And with Nigeria, for example, we had palliatives, which were food items that were meant to be given to citizens, were ordered by politicians. They wanted to give that down to their own political, constituencies, or in situations where items, maybe gloves or face masks or related COVID-19 was significantly inflated, and the auditor reported that in Senegal or in Sierra Leone or in Liberia or in Nigeria showed this. So I think we're amidst a significant opportunity for government to build trust, it's using this whole pandemic, because this should have been a time where the government should have strengthened the conversation between the people and itself and say, we got your back, and we're going to do it in a much more holistic and in a fair and equitable manner. The thing I wanted to say that thought. The second thing that I feel like we're missing effectively is that people want service delivery, and that is what the whole PFM structure comes to. Now, we might talk about the broader agendas of efficiency, of transparency, of accountability, but at the end of the day, people want service delivery, but service delivery in an efficient manner, in a way that, because we are aware that public resources are finite, and definitely it has to be efficiently managed so that we can give more to the people. It comes down to that. And so if we are building PFM systems and we are looking at it in a systemic view, we must understand that it must translate to service delivery. It must come into roads, into hospitals, into schools. People want to look, especially when you look at vulnerable and difficult environments, that exactly is what people want. So once the government puts service delivery as a key element, efficient service as a key plank of its PFM structure, that is when we know that, yes, you are building trust with the people. When you look at the huge resources that a country might have, and you see students sitting on broken planks and on dilapidated buildings, there is no trust that you can elicit in that kind of environment. So the prioritization of service delivery in an efficient manner, these are the kind of things that can rebuild trust in the environment that we have. And all the PFM structure we are building, we ensure that it's all geared to that, especially underserved and marginalized communities who do not have escapes without government. They can't afford private school. They can build private water systems. They can do. They depend on the road to take their produce from the rural environments to the urban areas. Their entire existence is wrapped around the functionality of government. That has to make sure that we build in systems that way. The thirdly is that we also must be long-term view in how we do our work. The reality is that systems that are not open and transparent without the pandemic will not be open and transparent and efficient and accountable during the pandemic. So when we make demands of government in the pandemic to be more open, be more transparent, be more accountable, if these structures do not exist, they would not be enhanced in an emergency period like a pandemic. It's very important that as actors that are working to redefine the trust between the government and the citizens, we also put a long-term view and long-term thinking in mind to ensure that we build structures and systems. And that's what I say, a question in the audience around the OGP. That's what something like open government partnership can do effectively. A framework that creates a permanent dialogue mechanism so that if we have an emergency or we don't have an emergency, what exactly should the structure of PFM look like? How accountable should it be? How open should it be? So irrespective of political interference or a change in government, there's a permanent dialogue structure that exists within the government and the civil society and the citizens on how public financial management structure will be run. I think if we categorize it on these three planks, we are moving forward into rebuilding the trust in government. The reality is that people just want to see government work for them. But it's unfortunate that most times people see themselves working for government, which means they're paying taxes and they're contributing and doing their best, but they don't see the government reciprocating in that way. We will be able to rebuild trust when it's very, very obvious to the people that the people in public service actually work for them and they are gearing all their energy to ensure that service delivery is efficiently delivered to them. I'll pause at that point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olusegun, for that important contribution. With that, I think we've heard from all speakers, and I see that there are a number of interesting comments and questions coming in. Unfortunately, don't really have time for a question and answer session. So let me ask Richard if he can maybe briefly summarize some of the key points also for us as development partners to take them further forward. So Richard, if I may ask you to give us a brief overview of some of the points that have been mentioned.
Thank you, Rosemary. So the chat has been very busy. Many of the participants have been asking, for example, to Harold, what he thinks about the architecture of PFM systems going forward and after the pandemic, whether the PFM systems will change and how. To Vivek, the participants are asking, how can we build trust through PFM in non-democratic countries and around the Pandora Papers? And to Oluson, the participants are asking if there's a means to build on open government criteria and to integrate that more in through a PFM approach to tackle the issues. More generally, the questions are around how important is it to address issues such as tax havens to avoid diversions of PFM public funds and so on. Largely, these are the areas the questions are around, including, for example, institutional leadership and systems. How can we address those through the PFM system? Thank you. Over to you, Rosemary.
Thank you so much, Richard. Just a question back to Julia. I believe we don't really have time and have to keep these questions to us and come to a conclusion, right?
We have 4 more minutes for this session, Rosemary.
Okay, so let me briefly turn to each of the speakers to try in 1 minute to answer. It's a big challenge, but let us try. So Harald, why don't you want to go first? Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I can be very brief. The first question concerned the potential changes to PFM after the pandemic. Now, most of the discussions in this area revolve around the investment needs in connection with the environment and the digital transition. And I think the result of that discussion will most likely be that we won't change that much because, of course, we have huge new investment needs, but in the end, the needs will have to follow the financial capabilities of our budget. So this is not down to the rules. Golden rules for, I don't know, sustainable investments will not help because they will not change the credit quality of our sovereign. So we have to, if there is a change, then it's down to better prioritization of what we actually want to spend our money on. And the second question on the tax havens and what elements in the PFM will actually be effective. I think the most important part that you need to look at if you want to deal with corruption is procurement. So in all the cases I know, and some of you may know, I have a personal connection to Africa. My wife is Namibian, my family is Namibian. The area where most likely things go wrong is public procurement. So if you have very robust rules there and transparency there, I think that actually goes a long way.
Thank you so much for this and for being brief. Let me briefly turn to the 2 other speakers to give them a chance to respond. Vivek, do you want to?
Yes, thanks, Rosemary. So 2 very quick points. Again, focusing more on the positive sides. The one thing this pandemic has made clear to us is the resilience of strong PFM systems. So when we have invested large sums of money in building PFM systems, we've seen that they are resilient to 2 forces. One is the crisis itself, which all countries have faced. And the second is that over the last 5 to 10 years, as we have seen non-democratic forces taking hold in many countries, even though those countries are now not necessarily having the most progressive leaders, their PFM systems are still delivering in terms of the basic amounts of transparency and accountability. And here, as a civil society person, I don't feel restrained in naming countries. Brazil, Philippines, India, South Africa, these are all countries in which we have major concerns around the kinds of leadership currently. But their PFM systems have held strong. A second point is that we can make the case to non-democratic leaders also why investing in PFM systems is in their interests, especially by presenting the issue from the perspective of what Olusegun said. delivery of services to people. They also are concerned around civic unrest, which can very quickly become flashpoints when people are frustrated by lack of services. And also non-democratic leaders can be incentivized to think about strong PFM systems from the perspective of controlling downstream corruption, even if they might not necessarily be interested in stopping it at their own levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this excellent excellent response, Olusegun.
I think I made a quick note in the chat box, and I spoke about that. How do we check abuse from open systems? I think a very important part is institutional leadership. It has to be very critical, and that institutional leadership has to permeate into the bureaucratic leadership. If we're changing, and I'm happy with what Arad said, the procurement system is where the actions happen. And most times it is seeded in the budgeting stage or even in the planning stage itself. So we have to make sure that we try as much as possible to do every single thing to get the institutional leadership buy-in. The second thing is we need to build strong punitive systems. There is no way that people are going to abuse the system, and there is no cost of bad behavior. And if there is no cost for bad behavior, people will not tune in and as much as possible. Then we need accountable and transparent systems. And the fourth thing is the resilience systems that is co-created, as Vivek mentioned. We need resilience systems that are co-created by the citizens, by the government, and not just co-created, they're also co-monitored to ensure that we get the kind of service delivery and the opportunity and that the citizens deserve. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll pause there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for this very interesting, albeit short discussion. There's so much to be said, and for lack of time, I'm not going to summarize the many important insights. Let me just point out very few points that seem cross-cutting to me from the different interventions. I think one is the role of checks and balances within the system, so as to make sure that if one element is not as strong, there are others that can intervene. And I think in that context, transparency, as been mentioned by Vivek in particular, is of course key, so that actors can stand up and take action. There's also been an interesting call to marry standards with civil society in a way to not just to have the information, but leverage the resources that are in the country to make things move. I also think there's been this tension between short-term COVID-related needs in terms of transparency and putting this in a longer-term perspective and building systems that are resilient for the next crisis. And maybe finally, even though that's not the last point, I think service delivery has once more been mentioned as key, in the sense that that's where we can see whether the declarations by governments and leaders are met by action, and that's eventually what's needed to build trust. So that's a very incomplete summary of this session, but thank you again, everyone, for that. And I'm handing over to Julia for the continuation of the program. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Rosemary, for such an excellent summary, and thanks a lot to all the speakers for this, brilliant discussion. We wish we had more time to get into the details of that. So now we'll move into public financial management in climate crisis. Yesterday, today, all the speakers, mentioned the importance of public financial management when it comes to the climate crisis challenge that we are all facing. And if I quote Erica, yesterday from European Commission, it's so critical, it's so urgent, and impacts developing countries, so there is no plan B. So let me invite the chair of the session, Samrita Sidhu, who is the Deputy Director of the Public Finance and Tax Department at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office in the United Kingdom. So Samrita, a real honor and a privilege to have you with us today, and over to you for chairing this session. Thank you. Samarita?
Just having a few technical difficulties. I don't know if you can hear me. Okay,
We can hear
brilliant.
you very well and see you very well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So many thanks, Julia, and to also the PFA colleagues who have invited me along. It's an absolute privilege to be part of this discussion, and especially on the 20th anniversary of PFA itself. You know, the UK's been a really proud partner of PFA from the start, alongside other partners, but I think all credit to, in particular, the PFA Secretariat for continually innovating, and also, obviously, for countries that have actually used the PFA framework to implement reform and kind of prioritise as they want. So a very happy birthday, a very happy 20th birthday. But as you said, we are here today to look at the challenges of the next 20 years and what are the changes that are needed. So today we are going to be discussing specifically how can public finance systems best adapt to the challenges of climate change. And before we get into the discussion, I would just like to welcome everyone joining us online. It's great to see how many participants we have. I'll assume all practitioners or friends in some way of addressing the climate change challenge that we have in public finance systems. Good morning, good afternoon, and maybe for the truly committed among you, good evening too. We have a really distinguished panel joining us, and I hope the technology works. Sorry, I am having a few difficulties, but I would just like to give them a big welcome. A thank you to them in advance for sharing their time and their reflections. We have with us today Minister Isaac Castro Esquivel, the Vice Minister of Public Expenditure from Costa Rica. I'm not sure if the screen is changing, but I'm hoping everybody is with us. We also have Pekka Moran, the Special Representative to the Minister of Finance, Finland, and obviously Finland are also the co-chairs of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. We have also Jahan
from our ministers in the annual meeting recently, and our members and partners. So we need to work on the basic issues. We are working to develop a training program, and that's going to be covering a lot of important areas, the tools, the technical side of it. Of course, modeling is important. We try to figure out what kind of models, short-term, medium-term, long-term, understanding to be developed based on those. So it requires a long-term work. There are not many countries that really have models in place to assess the impacts, to support fiscal financial policies, definitions, technicalities related to green budgeting, for example, data issues and other requirements, technical requirements, and of course we need to identify good practices. We have few countries that are really making a big effort to work to make this systemic change into their finance ministries. Involving stakeholders has been mentioned also in this context. My finance ministers will also need to come out of their boxes and be open, part of the open dialogue to develop these. But maybe finally, and it was mentioned also before, this is not only technical work, politics is important. That's why finance ministers meet 2-3 times per year, and they really need, this is a concrete, they've signaled the need for concrete advice on how to design reforms that are fairly complex, and also the fact that ministers actually need to understand what it takes to mainstream and support those changes in their ministries. So that's basically where I would like to stop, and happy to continue with questions that you might have.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pekka. And I will come back to that actually, because I'd like to just go a bit more specific and then return to something that you've just mentioned. So Roman, if I could bring you in, the area I'm kind of interested in just focusing a bit further on is that we know that developing countries alone will need more than $4 trillion per year up to 2030 just to meet their infrastructure and development needs. How do we specifically future-proof investment to become green and sustainable?
Yes, thank you, Samarita. Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, good afternoon. First, I would like to highlight, as my fellow panelists have done before, how critical PFM and state budget are for various purposes. Budgets are a tool to finance solutions, including investment for sustainable development and climate change, but also, when published and discussed, an accountability mechanism that allows citizens to monitor how public resources are spent. The PEFA framework is particularly useful in that regard, as it reinforces the capacity of the budget to perform these two roles. It is therefore important for states, which can better understand how to improve practices, for citizens, who can gain from improved practices, in particular in relation to transparency, and for donors, who can support states wishing to conduct reforms. Regarding green and sustainable development, France committed to ensure that 100% of its development aid will comply with the Paris Agreement. This, of course, encompasses any support from France to infrastructure investment in partner countries. Infrastructure investment is important for low, middle, and high-income countries alike. According to the report from the OECD, the UN Environment, and the World Bank, entitled Financing Climate Future, Rethinking Infrastructures, $6,900 billion should be spent each year until 2030 toward infrastructure to ensure development and climate change objectives can be achieved. The report also underlined that energy, transport, water infrastructures, and buildings are causing more than 60% of the global greenhouse gas emission. Then transformation is therefore necessary for all to achieve climate change and development objectives. I would like now to provide a few specific examples related to the COVID-19 pandemic and massive recovery programs as we are seeing right now. The European Investment Bank believes that the need for infrastructure investment in Europe represents approximately 5% of the European GDP. In the US, $1,200 billion are announced for infrastructure projects. For Africa, the African Development Bank believes that the need for infrastructure investment is more than $170 billion per year until 2025. China is also planning to investing massively through the new infrastructure plan. It means that infrastructure financing is a global issue. Moreover, we all need to maintain, modernize, and replace the existing infrastructures. No matter how these projects are financed, the state, both centrally and at the local level, has a key role to play in them. States create the framework, the conditions, and incentives necessary so that these investments can be aligned with the commitments made, for example, in the Paris Agreement or the 2030 Agenda. The stakes call for significant changes in public policy, program, and investment planning. What is a green and sustainable investment? How to ensure investment decisions are the right ones? Or is there a system allowing to trace it? It seems that part of the answer is integrating climate change and sustainability at all levels of policymaking, and especially in public finance management systems. As soon as we can mainstream climate change responses and sustainability into PFM, it becomes much easier to finance green infrastructure. The PEFA climate module has been drafted to help answer some of these questions. It aims at understanding to what extent the existing legislative framework and the PFM system contribute to the implementation of climate objectives. Only a few climate modules have been completed as of today, since the tool is quite new, but it certainly plays an important role in identifying needs for green budget reforms, which are themselves necessary for green investing. For example, France, via its development agency, Agence Française de Développement, and together with the European Union, the World Bank, and the IDB, support the government of Costa Rica in the implementation of the climate module. The tool provides a very good basis to work and develop partnerships. This is, of course, only the beginning of an answer, but we all want to support, strengthen, and promote the PEFA climate module. So thank you very much. Happy birthday to PEFA, and congratulations for the climate module.
Brilliant. Thank you, Roman. And we may come back to kind of your experience both from the Costa Rica side and France on that climate module, given that we are piloting it. So that's really great to hear. And I would like to bring in Jahan now. So you have particular insights in this space as the NDC partnership is actually helping countries to implement their nationally determined contributions. If we could really zero in, what are the most critical challenges in public financial systems that you are seeing needing to be addressed, and what kind of reforms are needed? What kind of support would be helpful in this context?
Thank you. Thank you so much, and happy birthday to PEFA for coming this far. You're 20 years old. I wish I was 20 years old. I'm very jealous, actually. Good morning to you all. So I want to start with the challenges here. So we have recently done an assessment in terms of how much would it cost for the countries, both from a conditional as well as from the unconditional targets point of view. And we did a very quick and dirty assessment across 35 different countries to understand the headline number for NDCs in those countries. And the headline number is 2.1 trillion US dollars. And then we plugged into the macroeconomic situation of those countries and realized that that essentially means that for LDCs, we are looking at investing 10% of the additional GDP of those countries. And if you look at middle income countries, we are looking at 6% of additional GDP to deliver on the targets that these countries have pledged for in form of their NDCs. Now, that's a considerable number. And we see that there are three different options or combination of options on how you can tackle this. The first is you can go for increased revenue collection. So much more aggressive, progressive revenue collection from these countries. The second one is you can increase the debt ceiling in order to accommodate the additional expenditure. And the third thing is you can also consider doing inter-budgetary transfer, meaning that you basically pick up some of the social cost and redirect that cost for climate-related expenditure. Now, it could be one of those or it could be a combination of those. Really depends on the country situation. However, you and I all know that in a 5-year political cycle, this is going to be extremely difficult. Any of those options would be very difficult. What does that mean? Does it mean that there's no way forward? The answer is yes, you can partially address these challenges by doing three things. The first thing is we can increase the efficiency of our spending. So for every dollar that we spend, we expect a greater return. Second is you can increase the effectiveness of the spending. So you're not necessarily just looking for social benefit, but you're also looking for co-benefit when it comes to climate for every dollar that you spend. So there's a greater impact across various different sectors, not just infrastructure, but infrastructure and climate. And third is you can give a very persistent and consistent market signal to the private sector, both nationally as well as globally. And all those three elements can actually be achieved by integrating climate into the PFM systems processes. You can increase your effectiveness, you can increase your efficiency when it comes to climate spending, and by integrating climate into the PFM processes and systems, you can give a market signal that the government is really serious about climate. That increases the overall confidence as far as external players are concerned. Now, the way to do this, there are several different aspects or levels. The first one is, of course, the planning part. And when it comes to the planning part, we do have NDCs and we do have, in some cases, national climate financing strategy. But none of these plans would actually work unless you are mainstreaming these plans into the medium-term development plan of the government. And even then, it is not sufficient. You have to translate this into the sectoral plans, and then you have to translate this into the district development plans, for example. So there are various different layers. Having an isolated climate plan is not enough. We need to give it much more form and shape and precisely answer the question how we are going to be delivering on these targets, because you wouldn't necessarily see all the how answer in the NDCs, but the how answers could be there in the national development plan, in the sectoral plans, in the district development plans. So that's one success factor. The second is you can have the plans, but the question is, do we have the budget to make these plans walk or even talk, for example? And that's where the budget cycle is so important. It's about the budget call circular, what kind of messages finance ministry is giving to the sectoral ministries. That's very important. Second is, how do the sectors or ministries or the budget agencies overall submitting this budget request, taking the NDC priority into consideration? And what we have learned is that you can send the instructions, but the sectoral ministries require certain level of capacity to submit that is understandable, that is coherent with the NDCs, that is even affordable. So here comes the very important part of building the capacity of the sectoral ministries and budget agencies overall to submit their budget requests in terms of sectoral issue papers and their overall sectoral budgets. The third element is the preparation of the capital budget. Now, what kind of screening mechanisms are we going to put in place that would take climate into consideration? So every capital budget that is being submitted by the sectoral ministries become climate compatible. And that's where you can demonstrate the co-benefits. So the screening part, the submission part is important, but if you flip the side, when the finance ministries are screening this budget, both from current expenditure as well as from capital budget point of view, they need to have the ability to understand how to screen this based on the climate perspective, based on their NDCs. And then comes the budget scrutiny. And this is an incredibly important part. How do we build the capacity or give a checklist to the parliamentarians so they can scrutinize this budget and ensure that this budget is climate compatible? So again, we are talking about processes, we are talking about procedures, we are talking about building the capacity, we are talking about executing that capacity at various different levels. And finally, I would say the procurement part is extremely important. Like, what sort of incentives are we going to give both to the public sector as well as the private sector, to the civil society organizations, so they can also ensure that their response mechanism is green in nature. So it's the purchasing element and it's also the selling element, and both have got green inbuilt into this. And finally, I would say, you know, you can have all these systems and processes and capacity be there, but if you're not tracking, you would never know where you are, which means that you wouldn't know where you want to go into the future. So what kind of tracking mechanism have we established? Have we actually ensured that the NDC priorities in form of indicators are also reflected in the national monitoring framework? Are we making sure that the financial management information system that the government has have taken all these issues into consideration? And that would give you the ability of data collection, the quality of the data, and how you can interpret those data when it comes to climate expenditure. So I would say, again, just to summarize, you know, the planning part, the budgeting part, the procurement part, and finally the tracking part. And for each of these, there is the advantage that the climate community has in terms of PEFA is that the pathway has already been established by the environment community. If you go back to 2009-10, we were talking about mainstreaming environment into the public financial management system. Now,
Jahan, if it's okay. Oh,
yeah.
sorry. because I just want to pick up on something you're saying and also bring Pekka and the Minister back in. And I'm going to be deliberately provocative. And the PEFA Secretariat colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong on this number. But yesterday, I think Scrutiny mentioned that if you transfer kind of PEFA scores into numerical scores against the benchmark of what is good, so 3 being good, the average is still well below, something like 2.34. And the International Budget Partnership, you know, on the back of COVID-19, did a report looking at 120 countries, and 2/3 of them fell well short of accountability measures. So is there a question that it's just building effective PFM systems, which is the critical issue, rather than making them climate sensitive in terms of where we are right now? Great to get your very quick reflection on that, and also Pekka, if possible, and then I'll bring in the Minister. And I am deliberately kind of putting that out there.
I think it's a combination of both. I think on one hand, we have to improve the overall PFM system, but at the same time, we need to ensure that the PFM is fully integrating climate. And I wouldn't necessarily see climate and PFM in isolation. The further you integrate, the deeper you integrate and build the capacity accordingly, the more co-benefits you're going to be getting.
Great, thank you. And then Pekka, just to bring you back in case you want to add to that answer, and also just to pick up on your point that Ministers of Finance cannot live in boxes, and Jahan was mentioning, you know, bringing the sectoral line ministries is so important. How's the coalition taking that further, or are there particular achievements you would highlight there?
No, I think this is clearly an area where we need to develop our national practices. But I would like to thank Jahan. It was an excellent presentation of how this should work to plan, put the process on framework and execution. And I think also when it comes to this 2.1 trillion that you mentioned, I think it's really important in terms of mobilizing finance, making it happen, is basically to have the framework in place and know exactly where the money is flowing, and have reporting on how that money, I'm also, of course, talking about the grant money, all money that is out there, have the instruments in place and have full transparency on how that money is used. That's where you go back to these transition, adaptation, or climate strategies, how they fit into your system. And that's where the credit worthiness comes, and you have a framework. Of course, there are different budgetary positions and debt levels, and all those challenges are out there. But I think in the end, when you face natural catastrophe or adaptation issues, that you need a lot of cash, a lot of funding, you need to. I think the key is to have a plan, have a framework on how to deal with it, and not as that's about the credibility and building the trust. But I think this is the very comprehensive that we need a comprehensive approaches, new approaches. So that's why it makes it so difficult. And I'm talking about, I think, all countries. This is a feedback coming from almost all members that I know from the coalition. Way or the other, these challenges are out there.
Super. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the challenges are huge, so it makes sense that everybody is facing challenges, perhaps at different levels, though, still. And I think I just want to then bring back in Vice Minister Skival, if we can. Like, just everybody has mentioned the importance of technical capacity and how much further we need to go. And even if we assume that, you know, technical capacity and systems are strong, we know that focusing on climate change, delivering reforms, is always inherently political. Budgets are shorter term than the challenges ahead. Elections come around frequently. In your view, how do we tackle both the political and technical challenges together and keep them running in parallel? And then secondly, if I can, from Costa Rica's experience, how do you move the national conversation to local level and ensuring local delivery and subnational delivery? If there's anything you can share from your experience there, that would be great.
No, muchas gracias. El elemento técnico y político se puede incompatibilizar cuando se hace un abordaje a través de lo que en Costa Rica llamamos una clara política pública consensuada con todas las partes relacionadas. Y eso es muy importante porque, vamos a ver, desde el punto de vista político podemos tener divergencias sobre las diferentes soluciones. En un país en donde tenemos una pluralidad de partidos y de fuerzas políticas, la única manera, digamos, en un sistema, digamos, democrático es consensuar una política pública con claros objetivos que hayan tomado en cuenta cada una de las diferentes partes. Esto nos permite generar una sombrilla para que desde la ejecución, digamos, se pudiera abordar de diferentes partes o diferentes formas. Y es aquí entonces donde entra el elemento técnico. En el caso de cómo abordar el elemento técnico, acá la apuesta es que la ciencia y los datos se vuelven muy importantes en el caso costarricense. Y la ciencia y los datos nos aproximan a la mejor toma de decisiones. Y es ahí entonces a través que el Ministerio de Planificación, que es un ministerio colega, el Ministerio de Hacienda o de Finanzas en el caso costarricense, ha venido estableciendo una serie de lineamientos técnicos en conjunto con Hacienda para hacer un abordaje que nos permita tener metodologías de análisis para las amenazas naturales, para los proyectos de inversión pública cuando están en las etapas de perfil, o también tener metodologías para analizar riesgos con enfoque multiamenaza y criterios probabilísticos en los proyectos de inversión pública. ¿Y por qué es importante esto? Por la conexión que señalábamos de la transparencia o de los elementos de toma de decisiones. En el momento en el que el contribuyente vea que hicimos una inversión pública y esa inversión pública por capacidad se la llevó un riesgo meteorológico, los contribuyentes no van a entender rápidamente que es que la dimensión o la escala de la obra no era para ese evento probabilístico. Lo que van a ver es un despilfarro de recursos. Entonces, la mejor manera de transparentar ese elemento es teniendo claramente una definición o orientación pública general que sea abordada desde el punto de vista más científico o desde el punto de vista de análisis de datos y de criterios técnicos de la mejor manera para poder explicar por qué algo se desaparece o por qué algo puede soportar un evento de desastre. Y además Hacienda le permite reducir los pasivos contingentes, porque cuando hacemos inversión pública que pueda ser superada por cualquier efecto de índole climático, en realidad lo que estamos trabajando es sobre los pasivos contingentes del Ministerio de Hacienda. Abordé la primera pregunta, pero ya se me olvidó la segunda, perdón, Sabrina, y la segunda, si me la recuerda.
Yes, of course, definitely. And thank you for that comprehensive answer. The second question was around how have you in Costa Rica taken the national conversation to a more local level and the subnational, national kind of what's the interaction?
A nivel, nosotros hemos generado una estrategia de inclusión de política económica. Nosotros somos un país pequeño con un alto desarrollo en la zona central urbana, lo que llamamos el gran área metropolitana. Nuestros índices de desarrollo son muy altos en esta zona, pero en las zonas más alejadas del gran área metropolitana, nuestros índices de desarrollo tienden a tener fragilidad. Entonces, en la estrategia se ha creado seis corredores de desarrollo regional que con un enfoque territorial y en donde los temas de descarbonización, de los temas de descentralización cobran una importancia. Y aquí entonces va a cobrar una importancia todo el tema de la adaptación al cambio climático y todos los procesos de descarbonización. El ejemplo que les daba de la ruta entre Ciudad de San José y Ciudad de Panamá trata uno de esos ejes de desarrollo, que es ese canal de conexión que hay por la zona sur hacia el vecino país, y entonces ahí se está impactando de manera territorial con diferente inversión pública, no solo resiliente al cambio, sino con todo este tema de descarbonización. Así como tenemos identificados esos seis ejes de desarrollo, a pesar de ser un país en territorio pequeñito, los impactos climáticos pueden tener hasta dimensiones muy diversas por la topografía en la que el país está. Nosotros somos atravesados por una gran, digamos, cordillera de montañas que nos divide las dos vertientes, y cuando se generan eventos climáticos tienen impactos diferentes en función de la posición de ese evento de huracán o no, que hace que las inundaciones sean más fuertes en una zona que otra, y por lo tanto tenemos que trabajar con esos temas regionales para poderlos ser incorporados en la materia de la inversión pública y en la prevención del riesgo del desastre.
Great, thank you so much, Minister. That's very clear, and I think I'm just going to pick up on that inclusion point from another angle apart from regional, and to bring Jahan and Roman back into it. I'm going to throw another contextual stat out there. So in Bangladesh, we know that rural households, who are the direct sufferers of climate change, are spending almost 2 billion a year on climate related disaster preparedness and response, and that in absolute terms that is double the spending of the government on climate change. How do you feel we are addressing equity and inclusion in the interplay with PFM, not just from protecting the poorest, but who is actually taking on the cost? Are we getting this right? Are we looking at equity and inclusion enough for the most vulnerable? If Jahan or Roman would like to come in, or anybody else. Apologies, I can't see everybody on the screen, so I'll just double check.
Yeah, I mean, are we addressing the equity and just transition issue? Yes, I would say that the conversation has started. You will see a lot of references to just transition if you look at South Africa's updated indices. So the conversation has started, but the question is, are we putting enough effort in terms of translating that conversation into a strategy, into proper costing, into understanding who is going to bear that cost? And the answer is not yet. I think what I would like to see going forward is that it's not PFM that should have a just transition element, but if you are looking at an updated NDCs, or if you're looking at LTS, for example, the long-term strategy, I think there should be a very specific annex on just transition and how you are going to be addressing the just transition issues. I think, again, the distortion or disruption is important, but it has to be controlled, and that controlled element should be reflected in that plan. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Roman, in case you would like to add anything, because I think we are running out of time, but I'm going to slightly sneak in one more question to all our panelists before that. And apologies, because I haven't looked at the chat bar yet, so I'll give an opportunity, but just in case, Roman, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you, Samrita. I can just say that the capacity to focus on climate issues, the budget process has been a recurrent request of countries we are working with, and therefore we are very happy to be able to finally answer those requests thanks to the PEFA climate module. And we hope to have the opportunity to work on this issue with many other partners.
Brilliant, and I hope we will be part of that partnership too, I think. So look, one kind of question, and I can leave it for a minute for everyone to consider, and then we'll look at the chat bar in case there are any other questions. In development, we tend to obviously focus very much on country context, sequencing being different in every place. Can our panelists think of any intervention which every country should be doing today, if they aren't already, which is applicable for all? I'm just going to put that out there and come back to it in a minute. And I may just, and again, apologies for my slight technical issues. I can't see the chat at the moment, so I may just check with Richard if there are any questions that he wants to bring in from the chat bar at all, or Julia, if you can help.
Samrita, can you repeat your question?
Yes, so my question is there any intervention which will help us to address climate change or the impacts of climate change, which all countries should be doing today. If there's just one intervention that everybody should be doing, that it's applicable for all. And I say that because obviously, you know, the broad principles everybody should be following, and everybody is at different paths on that journey. But if we had one headline to take away, what would it be for each panelist would be helpful?
I can come in first. I think it's extremely important to respect the planning and budgeting cycle and processes of the government. So banking on the existing planning and budgeting processes, the question is what kind of tools and what kind of instruments and capacity we can provide to the central government. But again, importantly, not just the central government, because implementation actually happens at the district level. So how do you translate that central government capacity development intervention at the district level? But I would say strongly that let's ensure that we are in line with the planning and budgeting system of the government, their cycle, as well as the governance system. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jahan. And any colleague would like to add to that or come in? Yes, Minister, please do. Oh, sorry. Pekka, come in, and then Minister will come to you.
I can be very brief.
Yo quería agregar que efectivamente, y en complemento a Jahan, hay un elemento que es muy relevante y estando en un país que tiene una posición geográfica muy ísmica, pero que la comparte no solo en su individualidad, sino con el conjunto de otros países. La coordinación de estos elementos se vuelve muy relevante, porque entre más esté fortalecido institucionalmente en cada uno de los países el efecto de la resiliencia al cambio climático, vamos a tener una incidencia sobre los flujos o la evitación de flujos migratorios no deseados. Y para nadie es un secreto que cuando en Centroamérica se genera un evento de índole climática, se disparan las migraciones. Y se disparan las migraciones, las más visibles son las que vemos que salen de los países de Centroamérica hacia el norte, pero también se generan hacia el sur. Y entonces eso genera también presiones adicionales sobre la inversión social. Y entonces, entre más podamos articular entre los diversos países los efectos de cómo adaptarnos o hacernos resilientes al cambio climático, le aseguramos a las poblaciones que están siendo, digamos, impactadas la posibilidad de niveles de vida mucho más acordes y evitarles pasar por la penosa necesidad de tener que tomar una decisión tan extrema como dejar su residencia, su lugar de vivencia y dejar de hacer un desarraigo que implica muchas condiciones en la vida humana. Entonces me parece que esto no solo tiene que ver con los temas de cambio climático, sino también con la psiquis de las propias personas que son desplazadas por estos eventos.
Brilliant. Thank you, Minister. And Pekka, please come in.
No, just to underline the importance of having sufficient, doesn't have to be too extensive, but dedicated in-house resources and good networks, as highlighted by the wise minister. But use the institutional partners and networks that are available, but have dedicated team to actually, you cannot utilize the framework if you don't have people how to actually run it.
Great, thank you. And I think I can see Julia possibly urging me on time-wise because we are slightly running out. I hope in some ways that question has actually helped summarize and bring together some of the critical issues. I mean, that is a rich discussion. This obviously needs longer to delve into each of the issues we've talked about in terms of how do we ensure strategies are live documents, not live documents, they're live and implemented, and inclusion is really at the heart of them, but also the governance issues that we've touched on. I'm not sure if I'm going to try to summarize. I can try let me see if I can do it in 30 seconds, some of the takeaways. And I will again just use Chair's prerogative. Like if we come back to this discussion, I think another thing I would like to add on is the use of disaster risk insurance as one of the things that we can really think about in terms of the partnership between countries that need it, country donor partners, and the private sector in ensuring that we are more adaptive as we make that transition from the short term to the long term and our ideal scenario. But so just in terms of some of the messages that I have heard, we definitely need to be proactive in using, adapting, and fully deploying our PFM systems to change incentives and to really deliver outcomes. Given the starting base in countries is very different, there is a lot of work to do yet, but we do have coalitions and mechanisms that are bringing countries together, and we have fantastic kind of leading examples in the form of Costa Rica and other countries which we can build on. As ever, this is not about technical solutions. This is about ensuring that there are technically strong systems which have political commitment behind them and accountability to citizens so that things are implemented fully. And we still, as ever, need to do better on ensuring that the most marginalised and poorest are fully included in this discussion and their needs are fully taken account of. I think there's a lot that I haven't covered because we did Jahan did a brilliant kind of explanation of going through the budget cycle from planning, procurement, transparency and monitoring, importantly, to ensure we get there. But I hope everyone has found this a rich discussion, and I hope we can continue this in the weeks and months to come. So just a big thank you to everyone that's joined us, and in particular to our panelists and the PEFA Secretariat for bringing us together. Back to you, Julia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samrita. Thanks a million to all the speakers. I mean, definitely a lot to be said when it comes to the climate and to the role of the PFM system. So let's switch gear. I mean, so the PEFA program is celebrating 20 years, and over time we have achieved quite a lot, and we are very proud for what we have achieved. And today we are launching the comprehensive ePEFA learning course. Before we play the video, let me invite Arsene Jacobi. My apologies if my pronunciation is too off, who is the director of the Multilateral Affairs, Development Aid and Compliance Department of the Ministry of Finance in Luxembourg, to share some remarks as we launch the PEFA e-learning course. Thank you. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And actually, the name is Arsene, but I do get it. It's a difficult name and a very old-fashioned one as well. I was never too happy about it when I was young because I wanted to be a Jean, Michel, and Claude, and what have you not. But I ended up to be an Arsene because of my mother's special considerations for very exotic, old-fashioned French names. Anyway, thank you for your kind words of introduction. If I understand correctly, I am supposed to market the e-learning course, so I'm very much obliged to do that. Coming from the Ministry of Finance, it is obvious that I have a keen interest in steady flows of fiscal revenues and obviously also how to spend them wisely. And that is why we didn't hesitate a second to contribute to PEFA when we first heard about the program. And of course, we should not forget about Jean-Jacques as regards the philosophical underpinning of all of this. Since its inception 2 decades ago, the Public Expenditure and Accountability Program has become a gold standard tool for assessing countries' public financial management systems and their strengths and weaknesses. Today, PEFA has been used in over 700 assessments in more than 115 countries, developing as well as advanced economies, and that at national and subnational levels. So PEFA is a public good, i.e. it's free for all to use, and that's actually great, a great characteristic of this program. It's a credible tool to support governments on their PFM, reform planning, implementation and monitoring. But PEFA obviously also has a wider, less well-known role, and that is what we're experiencing also right now. It's about learning and knowledge events, as the one we are celebrating right here, the 20th anniversary of PFA. And learning and knowledge obviously is also one of the program's core activities. It certainly aims at strengthening knowledge on the methodology, but even more importantly, the program facilitates peer learning and knowledge on what PFM actually means. And then during the pandemic, actually, it very much showed that PFA is extremely relevant because governments continue to undertake assessments, and the Secretariat, and I command the Secretariat, swiftly reacted and in addressing demands for learning and knowledge events by adjusting to a remote and virtual response. And by switching to the virtual approach, actually the Secretariat succeeded in maintaining its outreach to an impressive number of government officials, development partners, PFA users in general from all regions around the world. So very much appreciated from our side how swiftly the Secretariat reacted to that game changer. And since March 2020, all the learning and knowledge events are delivered now online. And thanks to this, the number of learning and knowledge events and the number of participants increased steadily, taking advantage of the flexibility offered by the virtual settings. So since the launch of the online service, around 7,200 participants attended all types of PFA learning and knowledge events, either organized by the Secretariat or at the request of governments, development partners, and other institutions such as professional networks and training centers. And this remarkable remote/virtual effort is now being complemented with the offer to learn about PFA at your own pace, actually, with a free online course. The online course offers new ways for clients and partners to interact with PFA, and this is very much welcome and appreciated. And the e-learn course aims at giving you, obviously, an introduction to the PFA product, the program, and how they can help you to improve public financial management. But moreover, the online course will introduce you to the PFA world, the PFA community, the framework, so that you can understand better what this is all about and make better use of the assessment reports. And first and foremost, get involved in the PFA process as a key stakeholder, because this is very much important. We need to have these feedback loops, obviously. So the course is not only for those that's intending to do an assessment, it is actually for everyone who would like to understand how PFA can be used for reform dialogue. The course is currently available only in the modern lingua franca, which is English, but will soon be made available also in French and Spanish, and I hope sooner or later we can branch out to other languages. So I'd just like to say, please do share your feedback and ideas with us. The PFA Secretariat is keen to hear from you. We need to get that feedback. It's extremely important. Also, final words from my side. As much as I like the infinite space of virtual world, nothing in my humble view can replace meeting face to face. So without further ado, I invite you to access the course and enjoy it. And I've been told there will be a brief video now, so enjoy the video. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Arsene. Mark, over to you for the video. Thank you.
Every country faces the challenge of how to use public resources efficiently and effectively. Without good public financial management, or PFM, governments may find it challenging to deliver essential services or focus on long-term goals. Did you know that you can learn to evaluate a country's PFM performance in a way that supports sustainable development? Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability, or PEFA, is a gold standard tool for assessing PFM systems. It's an evidence-based comprehensive tool that is free for all to use. And now, through our free, self-paced e-learning course, available through the World Bank Open Learning Campus, you can learn to use the PEFA framework. In Module 1, you'll learn what PFM means and how PEFA measures PFM performance across the budget cycle. In the second module, you'll gain a deeper understanding of the key principles and concepts that form the PEFA framework. Module 3 shows you how to apply the framework with a closer look at each indicator and what it measures. And in the final module, you'll learn how to manage PEFA's 10-step, 4-phase assessment process, which ensures your findings are accurate and provide a reliable basis for action. You'll also find out how to receive a PEFA check, an endorsement from the PEFA Secretariat, to confirm that your assessment followed the proper steps and is based on reliable evidence. You don't need to be an expert on PFM to join the course. The course is designed for government officials, development partners, and consultants planning to undertake, support, or utilize a PEFA assessment, and anyone interested in understanding how PEFA can improve PFM performance. With country examples, guidance documents, background notes, and quizzes to test your understanding. The course is a rich learning experience to get you started with the PEFA assessment. And after successfully completing the course, you'll receive a course completion certificate. Interested in learning more? Go to the World Bank Open Learning Campus to register for the free course. See you there.
Thank you so much. We'll continue with the marketplace, but before we do that, let me invite Adenike Iyayoya, who is the practice manager at the World Bank, and she will share with us some closing remarks, but also insights when it comes to the future and challenges ahead for PFM and the PEFA program. Thank you so much, Adenike. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Julia. What an interesting 2 days. I mean, it's been very interesting. When we started yesterday, the Vice President of the World Bank, Indemitz, said something very importantly. He wished us, when he was leaving, a constructive plus candid conversation, and he said I was going to bring results to a brilliant and practical ideas. And I can attest to the fact that the past 2 days has been very constructive. We've had very candid intervention, and obviously it's going to result to very brilliant and practical ideas that we can move forward. Proud to the webinar, we did put a quiz, a poll on Twitter and LinkedIn, and very interesting inputs came in. There were 4 questions. And the first question says, can we minimize fraud, corruption, wastage, and inefficiency with strong PFM systems? All of the responders said yes. But very specifically, 62% of the people who responded said yes if institutions work well. So institutions become pertinent for PFM. The second question says, in post-COVID world, what aspects of PFM do you consider of greater importance? And there were 3 options: budget preparation, budget execution, budget evaluation. And 57% of the respondents believe all 3 are very important. Of course, there were 40% that held on to each of it, but from the response, it's very pertinent that all 3 preparation, execution, and evaluation are very pertinent. The third question says, do you agree that PFM systems were able to quickly adapt and effectively respond to pandemic? Interesting response, 31% partially agrees and says if adaptive, 25% fully agree, and 44% disagrees. And the last question says, what do you see as the greatest strength of PEFA framework as gold standard for PFM? And 54% believes it's objective, it's evidence-based, it monitors progress, and it's globally acceptable. So interesting response from the quiz. And I think that just confirms everything we've done in the past 2 days. I mean, I consider, if you ask me to summarize the webinar, I'll say we've confirmed that PFM informs sustainable development. We've confirmed that PFM is very pertinent for green, resilient, and inclusive development. We've confirmed that PFM informs consistent drive for climate efficiency. And we saw this in the last intervention. We've confirmed that PFM is very important when it comes to gender and social development. We've also confirmed from the webinar that strengthening public financial management is critical to recover from the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. And this is through effective resource allocation. So we've seen again, very importantly, that PFM is critical, not only for building trust in government, but also for citizens' engagement. And these are all very, very pertinent. And again, we saw examples of these from the country examples that we've had over the past 2 days. So the whole discussion has been on what do we do going forward? We've had interesting 20 years. What do we do going forward? The fact I would like to emphasize is in the past 3 years, the PEFA Secretariat seems to have started the rebirth. I mean, we've had quite a lot of repackaging, quite a lot of robust interventions, doing a lot of work, not using the data that we have to inform global PFM, to come up with reports on what's happening globally. We've been working very extensively on climate, working extensively on gender, working extensively on subnational governance, on decentralization. And the intention is to build on all this very good work that we have done. So the sky, I would say, cannot limit us. The next 20 years, we plan to report even greater things that will be done by the Secretariat. So let me take this opportunity to express my thanks to everybody that has contributed immensely in the past 2 days. All the panelists, you've done a very great job. Looked at PFM from different perspectives, and we really thank you for this. But also very sincere thanks to all the participants for your questions, for your participation. We hope you'll be able to use the content of this past 2 days to inform development in your different organization and in your country. But very importantly, I would like to appreciate the 9 PEFA partners, the IMF, the World Bank, the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Development, the European Commission, the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Swiss State Secretary for Economic Affairs, the United Kingdom Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, the Ministry of Finance of the Slovak Republic, the Ministry of Finance of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. Again, let me say that in the past 2 years, we pulled you out of your normal routine to be a core part of what we do in the PEFA Secretariat. Thank you so much. We can't do this without you. And very importantly, to my colleagues in the PEFA Secretariat, thanks so much for all you do. It's so interesting that this has been very engaging, but next week, we have yet another engaging activity. So, we keep evolving and doing great things. So thanks, colleagues, for all the great work we do, that you do. I'm sure we can be able to inform public financial management and continue to use the PEFA as the gold standard to inform public financial management. So thanks everybody. But before you go, I just want to inform you that we have the marketplace. So Olitiana, you may want to inform people about the structure of the marketplace. So thank you everybody, and the very best wishes. Olitiana, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nikki, and thank you so much to everybody for joining the marketplace. So we switch now. So I'm Holitiana Ram from the PEFA Secretariat, and I'm delighted to welcome you in the last session of the PEFA 20th anniversary on behalf of the PEFA Secretariat. You met some of my colleagues already during the previous sessions. You're going to meet others in this session. And Hélène, Antonio, and Richard will be monitoring the chat as they have been doing since the two last days. Where you can still ask your questions and reflect on what is going to happen. And I would like also to thank all colleagues who you do not see, but work hard behind the scene, Helena, Sylvia, Nene, and Ashik. So we will conclude our 20th anniversary celebration event with experiences from PEFA users on three latest developed products by the PEFA Secretariat. We are fortunate to welcome today users combining a wealth of experience with PEFA. But before leaving them the floor, I would like to briefly talk about the three PEFA products we are going to discuss today. Mark, please, if you can kindly put up the three products up. Thank you very much. The first product we're going to discuss today is the Supplementary Framework on Gender Responsive PFM, or what we call PEFA Gender. It was published in January 2020. It is a set of 9 supplementary indicators that collect information on whether PFM systems take into account the government objectives to promote and contribute to gender equality and address the different needs of men and women. The 9 additional indicators build on PEFA framework, and they follow the budget cycle. And this is why, exactly as for the regular PEFA, PEFA Gender allows to benchmark performance, to track and highlight progress, and specifically, it allows also to identify opportunities to make PFM more gender responsive and to use PFM to close persistent gender inequality gaps. To date, we have 11 reports that have been received by the Secretariat. 5 of them are public, so you can check them on the PEFA website. And we have 9 projects ongoing or about to start in different countries. The PEFA gender assessment can be done at the central level of government, but also at the subnational level. And the assessment can be done at the request of the government as a standalone exercise. So it means you can have a PEFA gender assessment and only a PEFA gender assessment, or it can be done at the same time as PEFA assessment. The second product we are going to discuss today is the revised guidance for subnational governments. PEFA started to be used at a subnational level in 2010, and the trend is going upwards as assessment at subnational level represent 50% of the PEFA reports in the last 5 years. As mentioned yesterday by Erika Gerritsen from EU, PEFA is becoming a global tool as the assessment at subnational level bring new countries such as China or Mexico, Spain, Germany, or Belgium. And so what are the novelties that are brought in by the revised subnational guidance? New topics have been introduced that reflect the specificities of subnational governments, such as public participation, or a specific focus on fiscal decentralization, or for the revenue indicators, a focus on property taxes. The process has been simplified for producing the PEFA report, starting at the concept note level through the assessment with the introduction of sampling, for instance, and then also the clarification of the applicability of the subnational government framework. A service delivery module has been introduced, and then we can relate to what we heard today about the importance of service delivery. And so at the same time as a PEFA subnational is done, governments have the opportunity to use on a voluntary basis a set of questions to find out additional information on the service delivery part. And then an additional guidance is developed by the Secretariat on how to use a set of subnational assessments, because what happens usually is that governments decide to do a set of assessments, even though you can do an assessment at subnational level as a standalone as well. The third product we're going to discuss today is the Supplementary Framework on Climate Responsive PFM, or PEFA Climate. So it was at the heart of the discussions yesterday and today again. Just in a nutshell, PEFA Climate is a standard methodology for assessing how well PFM systems can support the implementation of government climate change policies. Again, it is a set of supplementary indicators. There are 14 of them. They cover the whole budget cycle. And the novelty in here is that PEFA Climate takes into account the country context through a questionnaire that is used to put in fact the indicators in the specific country context. The purpose of PEFA Climate is to benchmark performance. It is a PEFA product, but also to identify good practices. You heard about the importance to have those in the previous discussions today, and to identify opportunities to make PFM more climate responsive, taking into account the specific country context and priorities. PEFA Climate is piloted in a little above 10 countries now. You're going to hear about 2 country experiences today. As for the PEFA gender, it is done at the request of the government, and it can be undertaken as a standalone exercise or as part of PEFA Climate, as a PEFA assessment. And what we see lately at the Secretariat, we received 5 concept notes in the course of the 3 last months, where we have a PEFA gender, and a PEFA climate assessment all together. So the trend is to have a bundle. After this brief presentation, I would like to leave the floor to our guests, who will share how they used one of these products. We will start with a session on PEFA gender, and I am delighted to hand over to my colleague Urszka Zrinski, who used to work at the PEFA Secretariat and used to lead the development of PEFA gender. So Urszka, over to you.
Thank you very much, Olitiana, and thank you for inviting me to kind of rejoin the PEFA team and to celebrate with you jointly the 20th anniversary. Congratulations, this is great, and what an achievement. As you said, Olitiana, we'll first discuss the use and the application of the PEFA gender framework. I'm really excited about this session. As you mentioned, I had the privilege while I was still with the PEFA team to lead the design of the PEFA gender framework. And we have 2 distinguished speakers today from the government of Indonesia who will share their experiences, not only in applying the PEFA gender framework, as a methodology for assessing strengths and weaknesses of their PFM systems in terms of gender integration, but also how they've been using the PEFA gender framework to further promote gender budgeting in Indonesia. It's so wonderful to have Indonesia with us because Indonesia was one of the 7 countries that piloted the PEFA gender framework. And we thought that was particularly important, not just because of the size and the PFM tradition that Indonesia has, but most importantly, because Indonesia has been a champion in doing gender budgeting. The government of Indonesia has a long-standing tradition of using its systems of budget and fiscal policy planning, implementation, and evaluation to try to close gender gaps. And I know that a lot of countries around the world who are kind of embarking on this ambitious agenda often look up to Indonesia to learn more about the experience that the country has had. So it's my great honor to introduce you to the 2 speakers from the government of Indonesia who will share their experiences with doing the PEFA assessment and using it to improve gender budgeting. And we have with us Ms. Voro Srihastuti Sulistianingrum. She's the Director for Gender, Family, Youth, Child and Sport at the Ministry of Development Planning. And we also have Ms. Lenny Rosalind, Deputy of Gender Equality at the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection. This is going to be a relatively short session, so I'll ask each of our panelists a question or 2. And if okay, I would like to start with you, Ibu Lisa, because I know you were involved in the PEFA gender assessment in Indonesia in 2019. And I think it would be really helpful if you could share your experiences with the evaluation, and particularly, how was the decision made to do the PEFA gender assessment? Why was it important to you to do this assessment? And what were you hoping to get out of it? Over to you, Ibu Lisa.
Okay, thank you very much, Urska. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for kindly inviting me to this virtual conference. I think this is a great pleasure for me to join with you all here in the important event celebrating the 20 years of PEFA. This is a very special moment to share with all of you our experience in PEFA gender assessment that was conducted 2 years ago, actually. It's 2019, supported by the World Bank. However, before going through the assessment, I would briefly provide an overview related to Indonesia milestone in implementing gender mainstreaming strategy through gender responsive planning and budgeting, or GRPB. Our milestone in mainstreaming gender has started since early 2000, actually, and a lot of things has been done advancing gender equality in Indonesia. The first legal framework put in place in 2000 when we have a presidential instruction number 9, 2000, gender mainstreaming in development was issued. It laid as the foundation for gender mainstreaming in planning and budgeting, and since then, we integrate gender as a strategy in Indonesia national planning document, long-term and medium-term. We developed a gender budget tagging mechanism in our planning and budgeting system, and we created a gender analysis pathway, which later is translated into gender budget statement, the tool for conducting gender analysis, which focusing on 4 aspects as access, participation, control, and benefit of development between men and women, as well as the special needs groups. In 2012, we also developed a national strategy to accelerate gender mainstreaming through gender responsive planning and budgeting. It was signed by 4 ministers. We call the 4 ministers as 4 drivers: Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection, and Ministry of Home Affairs. The national strategy is developed to ensure that GRPB implementation, both at national and regional level, is aligned, systemized, and also supporting the practice of good governance, sustainable development, and achieve the Millennium Development Goals at the time. Starting 2014, we implemented the GRPB in 36 line ministries and 34 provinces. We started to evaluate the implementation of national strategy around 2016-2017. And the findings made us clear that the GRPB was advancing both at central and subnational governments, but we need a stronger legal framework and adjustment with the development of national policies and regulations. So since 2018, we are initiating the revising the national strategy aimed at issuing a presidential decree on accelerating the implementation of gender mainstreaming and include Ministry of Village and Transmigration as a new driver in GRPB. The PEFA gender assessment was carried out in the right moment at the time, because at the same time we are developing the presidential decree in 2018. We were glad that Indonesia was selected to be one of the pilot countries for the PEFA gender assessment, and at that time, Bappenas, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection, and also Ministry of Home Affairs become the informants as a PEFA assessment. So we discuss and we conduct an assessment, and we we fill in like a questionnaire and also discussing with kind of like conducting a discussion at the time to have a good knowledge about what is the implementation of GRPB in Indonesia. Of course, we expected that the assessment could provide comprehensive recommendation on how to accelerate gender mainstreaming in order to reduce the gender gap that persistently exists in the last 20 years since the first implementation of gender mainstreaming strategy. From the assessment, actually, we got scored B only in the 3 indicators. It's a budget circular, budget documentation, and tracking budget expenditure. And the 6 still have like a D score actually. So even though we already have like a 20 years implementation of the gender mainstreaming in Indonesia, but we still have challenges in the implementation of gender responsive planning and budgeting. We have a 3 score B in the budget circular because we have a key finding that from 2010 the budget circular content provision that each echelon 1 is the highest unit within the Ministry of State agency organization to formulate and present the gender budget statement, and all budget documentation should be accompanied by both budget staging and GBS, gender budget statement. Indonesia gender budget statement format suggests minimum information to be included consists of output, situation analysis, budget, and outcome. And furthermore, gender responsive budget is among the themes of the state budget. So this is make us become like have a B score. Yeah? And in terms of the budget documentation indicator, we got score B because the findings said that in general, our budget document have contained gender element. Budget implementation document contains details of expenditure measures aiming to improve gender equality. Consequently, annual budget law, president regulation on the detail of budget law, and also budget implementation document have gender elements too about the gender budget. Planning documents that include midterm development plan. This is we call it RPJMN. And it is a 5-year strategic plan for line ministries, and also annual work plan include plans for GRPB that contain commitment to achieve gender equality. So that makes us get a score B. However, we still have like I already mentioned about the 6 indicator related with the budget policy proposal, public investment, sex disaggregated data, annual financial reports, and also evaluation of impact and legislative budget security got a score D. It's a very it's low actually. And from those indicators, we got insight that there are many areas to be strengthened. And we are aware that the current GRPB is still focusing on planning and budgeting stages rather than a whole budget cycle stages. So the overall, I think the PEFA gender assessment is very useful to guide us improving the current implementation of GRPB. We learned from the assessment that the coordination and collaboration among the 4 drivers need to be strengthened. The institutional framework for GRPB is already exists, but then the mechanism on how to oversee the implementation as well as monitor and evaluate the GRPB is still not in place. So the implementation of GRPB strategy needs to be enhanced. At the moment, we are focusing on putting the gender as a strategy in national planning documents and encouraging line ministry to implement GRPB through gender budget tagging through planning and budgeting process. But we are lacking on providing clear direction on the priority area in order to accelerate the gender equality. So for example, what kind of programs and activities in the area of economic and political empowerment that specifically must be designed gender responsive, so that all related line ministries can conduct gender analysis and create relevant intervention to achieve the gender equality. So I think this is that we learn from the assessment. And we are the drivers still need the strengthen of our capacity in monitoring and evaluation of GRPB, especially to ensure that gender budget has a meaningful contribution that led to achieving the equality. So I think this is the another area that we should improve more on the how we need to improve our capacity to evaluate the program and activities that has been take as a program and activities that gender responsive. In order to do that, the improving and institutional capacities is a must. And Bappenas, Ministry of Finance, and also Ministry of Women and Empowerment and Child Protection are mandated to review the GBS from line ministries. But our capacity were still limited. So I think we need improving ourselves according to our capacity. Another thing that also very important is the availability of sex disaggregated data, including the use of the data for gender analysis as well as monitoring and evaluation. Lack of the data become one of the biggest challenges in implementing GRPB, although we have carried out many efforts on improving our data, especially this disaggregated data. So I think that's all our experience and also the lesson that we have from the PEFA assessment regarding the budget, gender budgeting. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Ibu Lisa. It's so great that you share these experiences with us in terms of the assessment. What also surprised you about the findings, right? But I still think it's been incredible to see the work that Indonesia has done specifically in tagging expenditure for gender equality. You're one of the few countries in the world that has developed such a systematic approach to doing it. So despite I know some of the challenges with it, I think it's still good how you're inclined to continually improve this approach. And I think another important point in your presentation is that the way Indonesia does gender budgeting is not solely focusing on gender issues. It's almost more like an equality budgeting, right? Trying to think what are some of the social inclusion gaps in the society among men, women, boys, girls, people with disabilities, and then using your budget policies to address those. So I think that's really incredibly commendable, and congratulations for doing this amazing work for over 20 years. So thank you again. And now I would like to turn to you, Ibu Leni. I know you weren't involved in the assessment process as such, but I know you're now leading the process of taking the PEFA gender assessment findings and really trying to think how you can further improve gender or equality budgeting in Indonesia. So it would be great if you could share some of your experiences and how you're approaching this work.
Yeah, thank you, Urska. A good night here from Jakarta. It's almost midnight here. Thank you. And first of all, happy birthday to PEFA. It has been 20 years, yeah. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And yes, I was not involved in the PEFA gender assessment, but I used the report, yeah, the result from the report to put to our what we call future policy design as well as the program design. If we look to the purpose of the PEFA GR assessment is, it's good here because I saw from the report that would be to provide a benchmark of performance of PFM system, yeah, and also to determine to what extent are PFM systems, processes, and institutions. And I think those three components are very critical. And if we look at those 9 indicators, when we implement the FIFA GRP assessment. For example, here, I have been more than 20 years in the National Development Planning Agency, the same agency as Ibu Woro before. So I'm the one who developed the gender analysis tools for planning at that time, yeah, and also use it and use the tools to do the gender analysis in the 9 important sectors, sectoral developments, and also initiating the gender budgeting at that time. If we look at the first indicators, for example, talking about of government policy proposals, especially on how the analysis of expenditure, for example, yeah. The government, as mentioned by my colleagues Ibu Woro, that the government has already done gender budget tagging, yeah. And we know from its ministries, Ibu Woro mentioned that there are 36 ministries who have done gender budget tagging, and also 34 provinces. And if you look at the amount of the budget itself, you know, it's big budget. But then using this PFM, yeah, using this PEFA gender, then we'll see whether the impact analysis, gender impact analysis of expenditure policy proposals, you know, from that sectors who have a big amount of money, but how we can analyze it really give the positive impacts or by gender or so. It's very important. That's I just would like to give examples, because using that example, then we here in the ministry will work with the line ministries on doing the next step. And also relate gender responsive public investment management. We are going to see the impacts of major public investment projects on gender. See, even though the government has already had a big amount of money about gender responsive budgeting, but then the impact of our major public investment projects not go in a equal, yeah, by gender. So this is again at this PEFA gender, the result of the PEFA gender assessment is very useful. That's why, even though I'm not involved, because I'm before this, I'm just as a deputy minister since just a couple months ago. So I was not involved. But then once I see and discuss with the World Bank in Indonesia, then I saw at the time that, oh, this is a good tools that government could adopt, yeah, and use for more deep analysis, yeah, because when I become as the deputy minister for gender equality analysis, for example, I use Human Development Index. Yeah, if we talk about the Human Development Index as a total, a man and woman as a total, it increases every year. In the last 11 years, it has been increased. But then the questions, if we look Human Development Index of men in Indonesia and of women, both of them are also keep increasing in the last 11 years. But the gender gaps remains the same between Human Development Index of men and a woman. So the gender gaps in the last 11 years with the different points, you know. So we can ask ourselves here that what's the impacts of our, you know, major public investment projects on, yeah. So because Human Development Index, we talk about education, health, and economics, right? So we have to see on those sides. And also I'm interested also on the evaluation of impacts of service delivery on gender equality. This is also very critical because the government does a gender evaluation, yeah, gender responsive what we call annual evaluation. Yeah, we do evaluation every 2 years. Yeah, every 2 years. Sorry, every 2 years, and most of the indicators used are still on the institutional arrangement as well as the policy, yeah, data, those kind of stuff, but not in the implement. Not put a lot attention on the implementation itself, including the impact of the investment from the budget expenditure. So this is that's why I look at this PEFA gender assessment report, and I see, oh, Indonesia, as mentioned by my colleague Ibu Woro, we only got 3 Bs, yeah, and this is the one discussed with the World Bank in Indonesia. Oh, gender responsive budget circular and documentation as a budget expenditure for gender equality. But for the main indicators, the 6 ones, the other ones, because we have 9, right? So we only D on the 3 indicators, the 6 indicators. I think those are the critical ones, like, as I mentioned before, the impact of government policy proposals, gender responsive public investment management, and also gender evaluation of the impacts. Yeah. Yes. So yes. I think for me, it's good time now. And also I think next year, the government will prepare a 5-year development plan. Yeah, I think it will start a development plan. And I think using the result from PEFA gender assessment, because you also, from this report, there are some recommendations. And I think those recommendations are really fit to what we can improve in the near future. Perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ibu Leni, for sharing this. And I think it's always, hard to find the balance about, how ambitious to be with these reform programs and still making sure that gender equality budgeting work. But it's been incredibly wonderful to hear how ambitious you are in terms of expanding the work on doing gender impact assessments, also focusing on public investment. But I think the link you mentioned between doing the budgeting, but then looking also at the impact on closing gender gap is something that is definitely something that we can learn from Indonesia, and very commendable. So thank you very much. It's very unfortunate that we have such limited time. I think we could discuss this continuously. It's such a great topic. But for now, I thank you very much, Ibu Lisa and Ibu Leni, for joining these celebrations, taking your time. It's almost midnight there. So with this, thank you again. I'll close this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Urska.
Thank you
all.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And now I hand it over to my colleague, Guillaume Brulé, to lead his discussion on PEFA at the subnational level. Thank you, Guillaume.
Thanks a lot, Urska. It was a real pleasure to have you with us today for celebrating the 20 years of PEFA. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to all of you, those who are in the same time zone than I am in Europe. I'm Guillaume Brulé from the PEFA Secretariat, and I'm pleased and honored today to moderate the subnational session. As you know, subnational governments are a significant share of the PEFA activity, as Olitiana mentioned. Half of the reports we have received for the 5 years, 2/3 of the reports that we are expecting in the coming 24 months. So it's a significant share. But as a matter of fact, subnational governments are a key player for the delivery of public services to the people, as they are also a key player for climate change policies in adaptation or mitigation. Think about transportation, urban planning, housing. All these policies are so important for the climate change policies. But that's also a very interesting animal, subnational governments, as they are very diverse in terms of the size, the wealth, their power for policies, or their level of decentralization. This diversity, we can find it also in the PEFA assessments. Think about Mexico City, who had done a PEFA assessment a few months ago, more than 20 million inhabitants. And compared to the city of Martville in Georgia, in the mountains of Georgia, with only 3,500 inhabitants. So a large diversity and a strong interest. For these reasons, the PEFA program has developed a new approach to subnational PEFA, which streamline, simplify, and enrich the methodology. To talk about subnational PEFA today, we have with us two excellent experts of local PFM and excellent experts of local PEFA, whom I thank for their presence and their willingness to be with us today. So we have Mr. Jordi Baños Rovira from Catalonia. He's a Spanish economist specialized in PFM. He's currently head of the budget policy at the Catalan government, after holding different PFM positions in the Catalan government, but also other subnational governments in Spain. He's also a lecturer and a researcher in PFM at the University of Barcelona and a consultant for the World Bank and the IMF. He was in charge of the PEFA that was done in 2020 and published in 2020. Blaise Foka is advisor to the mayor of Douala in Cameroon. He's also an expert of local PFM and local finances. He is, I think, a PEFA assessor, previously director of the budget of the urban community of Douala. He was the focal point for the two last PEFA assessments conducted in Douala in 2012 and 2018, and he was afterwards in charge of the reform plan for PFM that was conducted in Douala. So my first question is for Jordi. The Catalan experience, the PEFA assessment conducted in Catalonia is very interesting for several reasons, but among them, it was one of the first one conducted in an EU member state for local government. And it's also a pure self-assessment conducted from A to Z by the government itself. So my question is, why did you use a PEFA? Why were you a precursor for using a PEFA in your government?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon from Barcelona, and many thanks for the invitation, and especially congratulations to PEFA for this amazing 20 years, and we expect that the next 20 years will be even better. Thanks, Guillaume, for this question. I should mention that we were in the middle of a budget reform process, and after 2-3 years of implementing some reform actions, we were wondering if we were pointing to the right stuff. I mean, are we really aware which are our main weaknesses in our PFM system? Well, I should mention, sorry, that we were focusing on budget and matters, so it was a partial self-assessment. So we were thinking that if we were pointing to the right things, we were really aware which are the most important weak points that we already have. So then, talking with my budget director, we were thinking, hey, why don't you use the PEFA? PEFA generally, of course, it's an assessment framework, but could be also a diagnosis framework. So if we would like to have a comprehensive assessment of how do we manage our budget, why do a PEFA? So then, after thinking about doing a PEFA self-assessment, assessment, we contact PEFA Scrutiny and help us to finally get decisions to get involved in such assessment. And also we were thinking that what we do, it's assessment done by somebody externally, or should do it by our own, using our own resources. So thinking about it, we thought that if we do this assessment, obviously with the corresponding reviews, and also in order to get the PEFA check, and also to assure that the complete process was really with quality assessment, quality assurance. So we decided that we'll do it by our own, because then we will be more sure that all the findings and also we increase the knowledge of this assessment and also what is considered best practices or advanced practices or what is a basic practice by our own staff. So what decide is we'll do it by our own. We expect to save cost, we expect to save time, and also what we expect is that as we will do that assessment, our people, our staff will be more aware of what is a more advanced practice, in which moment we are now, and which would be the next steps. So we decide that. Also, we are really happy for doing that because at the end it took 4 or 5 months, if I'm not wrong. Obviously, some of them it was drafting the report, but people was really on the topic. Also, and also, one thing is really important, the outcome of this report. First was we got a list of 35 tentative reform actions that we think that help us to point better the reform actions that actually contribute to reduce the gap of, well, or mitigate our main budgetary weaknesses in our budgetary system, and also that help us. And it was a very nice moment because at that time, 2 months ago, there have been celebrated the elections for the Catalan Parliament. So we have a new government. So at the moment that the new Minister of Finance took his office. So the first thing was we present you the fresh PEFA assessment because it was only a thing of 10, 14 days. So we present that and also to the Secretary of Economy and Finance. And they were really amazed that we have, they thought that we have a very strong system, but they were amazed of the list of things we have still to do. But what we get is, okay, let's do it. I mean, maybe they're not aware of what that involves, but that helps us to, to better plan a reform, to refocus some of the actions, to refocus resources on the efforts. So what we're in the moment we're now is we have validate or have the okay for this list of reforms that we expect to do in the period 2021-2024, and also we expect to do a new PEFA assessment in 2025 in order to assess if we are actually improving. And that helps us to then, from this multi-year plan of reform actions, now we're passing from the step-to-step actions, okay? We are planning for 2021, 2022, 2023, okay? And so we had the chance to start introducing such reforms in the current processes, but also in the new presented draft budget 2022, which already includes some of the measures that were pointed out in the PEFA assessment.
Thanks a lot, Jordi, for your very, very comprehensive answer and perfectly in time. So, je vais maintenant basculer en français pour demander à Blaise. C'était donc la deuxième évaluation PEFA qui a eu lieu à Douala récemment. Qu'est-ce qui vous a amené à mener cette deuxième évaluation PEFA? Qu'est-ce qui ont été les facteurs en 2018 qui vous ont porté à faire cela? Et est-ce que vous pourriez aussi également nous en dire plus sur la manière dont vous avez mené les plans de réforme avant cette deuxième évaluation et après cette deuxième évaluation?
Merci Guillaume. Et je ne saurais commencer cette intervention sans féliciter le secrétariat PEFA pour ces 20 années intenses. On n'a qu'à voir l'ensemble des documents qui ont été produits, des outils qui permettent de mesurer la performance et surtout au niveau infranational. Nous pensons que c'est l'avenir du PEFA. En réalité, qu'est-ce qui a amené la ville de Douala à faire cette seconde évaluation PEFA? C'est parce qu'après 2012, la première évaluation qui a eu lieu en 2012, nous avons eu la chance d'avoir un plan stratégique de réforme sur 5 ans, donc de 2013 à 2017. Donc, 2018, cela tombait bien en 2018 pour que nous fassions un PFA répété pour voir si nous avons pu améliorer les faiblesses remarquées pendant la première évaluation. Et pendant toute la période, je veux dire que le PFA était pour nous une boussole. Et nous avons essayé d'être regardants sur ce que nous faisions avant, sur la base des notations que nous avions eues. Et qu'est-ce que nous avons changé? Nous avons surtout, sur le pilier 3, concernant la budgétisation fondée sur les politiques publiques, nous avons réussi à relier notre budget avec les documents de planification, qui est le PDU. Et cela a permis que les projets que nous avons pu mettre en œuvre soient en cohérence avec, avec les politiques et mises en œuvre pour les populations. Donc, nous pensions que cette seconde évaluation devait nous permettre donc de faire le point sur les progrès réalisés. Et malheureusement pour nous, pendant que la période, il y a eu le deuxième guide de PEFA de 2016 qui est arrivé et qui est encore plus rigoureux que le guide de 2011 que nous avions utilisé en 2012. Cela fait que en 2018, notre performance s'est retrouvée, je peux dire, nous n'avons pas atteint les objectifs que nous visions, notamment parce qu'il y a eu de nouveaux indicateurs et il y a eu de nouveaux, les experts ont eu de nouveaux éléments qui leur permettent d'apprécier même les situations en 2012 où ils n'avaient pas suffisamment d'éléments et qu'on nous avait donné peut-être une note un peu plus bonne. Donc, nous pouvons dire que ce qui a surtout changé, c'est surtout dans la mentalité, dans la façon de travailler avec une boussole et surtout d'adopter les bonnes pratiques. Et nous avons fait beaucoup de progrès, même si les notations semblent ne pas donner l'impression, mais nous pensons vraiment que cet exercice nous a permis, et nous remercions le secrétariat PEFA, et je crois que toutes les entités infranationales aujourd'hui en profitent parce que la construction du guide aujourd'hui, qui est le nouveau guide qui est dédié spécialement aux entités infranationales, nous conforte parce que d'adaptation en adaptation de certains indicateurs au niveau infranational, nous pensons que cela n'a pas aussi permis d'apprécier les vrais efforts que nous faisions pour améliorer nos performances. Et puis encore, je dirais que le fait qu'il y ait au niveau infranational certaines activités qui relèvent aussi du niveau national, tout le temps tire nos performances vers le bas. Nous avons d'ailleurs, pendant la mise en œuvre de la stratégie, on s'est focalisé sur les activités qui relevaient totalement de notre responsabilité. Et nous avons fait beaucoup de progrès à ce niveau, mais dès qu'il s'agissait des actions qu'il fallait prendre au niveau national pour impacter la performance au niveau infranational, on s'est retrouvé avec des notes qui ne nous ont pas permis d'être fiers. Donc, je pense que c'est un exercice et ce qui nous a permis d'aller à cette deuxième évaluation, c'était justement de voir les progrès que nous avons faits et nous avons vraiment fait des choses. Mais ce qui a surtout fait que nous n'avancions pas beaucoup, c'est que les réformes au niveau national nous ont plombé, comme je le disais tantôt, et nous pensons que l'État aujourd'hui a pris conscience du fait que les entités infranationales ne peuvent avoir leur performance appréciable que si au niveau national, il y a une prise de conscience par rapport à cette performance qui peut être globale. Et d'ailleurs, moi, je pense que l'État a tellement pris cela en compte et que l'État vient justement sur la base de ce qui a été fait à Douala, de lancer aussi un PFA groupé au niveau national, ce qui pour moi, et à l'époque, nous avons été en tant que pionniers, la ville de Douala a consulté par rapport à cette démarche. Nous avons apporté notre expertise pour accompagner l'État. Et l'évaluation qui est en cours pour 12 collectivités groupées au Cameroun actuellement, et je pense que c'est une preuve que le PFA a fait une grande entrée au niveau infranational au Cameroun.
Merci beaucoup, merci infiniment Blaise et merci infiniment d'avoir mentionné l'existence de cette évaluation groupée de 12 collectivités au Cameroun qui va, j'espère, permettre d'améliorer les goulots d'étranglement dans la gestion des collectivités locales au niveau national, puisque le PFA est là aussi pour ça, pour améliorer globalement les systèmes de décentralisation fiscale et budgétaire. Et donc, ce sera un excellent exemple pour cela. Thanks a lot to you both for your very, very good presentations. I'm really sorry that for time issues, we have to move to the next topic. Also, it is also a very, very excellent topic. So the floor is yours, Olitiana, on climate. And thanks again, Jordi. Thanks again, Blaise. I hope you will have time for answering some questions at the end of the session. Thanks a lot to you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Merci, merci Guillaume. Thank you so much, Guillaume. So this is the third mini session we have on how PFA products were used or are being used. So I'm really delighted to welcome two speakers today. Shada El Sharif. Shada is an advisor to the government of Jordan for the Ministry of Planning and International Cooperation. And Shada is a climate change expert. And she was a team member of the Jordan PFA Climate Assessment. And we have also today with us Richard Neves. I don't know, Richard, if you can turn on your camera. Richard is a public financial management advisor to the Mozambique Ministry of Economy. And Richard was a pioneer because he led the first PFA climate assessment in Samoa. So he was the team leader for this assessment. So the same question to you both. What did PFA climate assessment and PFA climate report bring to government of Samoa and government of Jordan? So maybe Shada, if you'd like me, I would like to start with Richard because he started, in fact, as it was the first assessment. So Richard, over to you.
Thanks, Holly. And a quick congratulations to PFA on their 20 years. I've been involved in PFA for about the last 10 in some way, shape or form. As Holly just pointed out, when I was working for the IMF's Regional Technical Assistance Centre, we worked with Samoa and the PFA Secretariat about taking a climate change PFA pilot to task. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Pacific, there's a lot of advocacy there for improved climate financing, primarily as their main goal, as they perceive themselves as one of the most vulnerable regions in the world. And one aspect of that was essentially that Samoa is one of the better performers in terms of PFM systems and processes in the Pacific, and wanted to sort of demonstrate its credentials. So we had quite a multifaceted team, and that included participants from the IMF, the World Bank, the PFA Secretariat, the Infrastructure Facility for the Pacific, which is based in Australia but funded by the bank, and the overall regional advocacy group the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, which helps Pacific countries in terms of their representations around climate change efforts. So essentially the way we looked at it, we did have a full PFA in Samoa perhaps 8 to 12 months before, where we were physically there. So Samoa post-COVID presented itself as a good option because we could build on the previous PFA and we could do it virtually. Make these things being done virtually is a lot more difficult. So we had to go with someone we knew as well. And of course, what a PFA does is it doesn't assess the merits of your policy position. You know, a normal full PFA, when we first start doing one, we explain to country officials that this isn't about assessing the merit of your fiscal or macroeconomic policies. It's just whether your processes and systems, that is your legal system that, you know, overarches your IT systems and your people, your human resources, are actually working towards or aligned towards achieving those particular objectives. So in terms of the climate, the PFA climate, we weren't there to make an assessment on the merits of the climate policies, adaptation or mitigation, but simply to see if the PFM systems that underlined the underlying PFM systems actually supported the objectives. So that took us quite a little bit of time to do because it was all done virtually and it was new, it was a pilot. Many thanks to Guillaume, who was the PFA Secretariat person that was on the team. And I think we all learned quite a bit, as did the Samoans. And in the end, what we did was we did something that was a little bit practical in the sense that we went through, and of course the assessment probably wasn't the most, wasn't full of A's or B's. I mean, the scores were around the C and the D range. And to be frank, there'll be I can't see any country ever at the moment achieving high scores on the PFA climate. And that's pretty obvious because it's a new area. And there will be, this is around really positioning countries to start looking at how they can improve themselves. And maybe they can be achieving B's in, you know, 5 or so years' time. But there are 4 points that we left them with. And that was to review their revenue approach to see whether they could change the way they raised revenue around their climate change ambitions as laid out in their national determined contributions. And they're your traditional carbon tax methodologies, removing subsidies for fossil fuel generated electricity, improving their public investment processes to incorporate climate change resilience characteristics into their overall appraisal, selection and prioritisation processes. I think Jahan mentioned this before, but of course, one of the aspects is around the budget circular. So the budget circular is very mechanical in terms of saying, here are the dates, here are the timelines, submissions must be in by this particular time, etc., etc. No new spending, but somehow putting, if climate change is indeed a significant priority for the Samoan government, then it really does need to be reflected in key documents like budget circulars, and examining the approach that was tracking and how you track climate change related expenditure from when you initially start thinking about it at the budget time through to when it finally gets executed. Now, on that final point, this is proving to be a difficult thing because there are lots of policy priorities, gender, poverty reduction, climate change, and people start saying, well, you've got to start tagging these things. So that's obviously a bit of a difficulty when we're looking at charts of accounts. And Samoa doesn't tag, but the UNDP had done an exercise across 6 countries, of which Samoa was one, where they had gone through each of the appropriations and identified their climate change characteristics, whether they were 75% climate change, 50%. And so we took that approach and then applied it to the new applied it to the new appropriations subsequently that we were examining, just to get an idea of how much of their own budget was, aligned to this climate change priority. And I think in the end, one of the comments I was making to the government there was that Samoa is very vociferous about climate change. It will be in a lot of workshops. It'll attend a lot of seminars, etc., and advocate for greater climate change financing, greater efforts by all countries in terms of dealing with climate change. I think what the PEFA climate does is demonstrates to themselves, other stakeholders in the country, such as civil society, business, the private sector, households, and obviously to donors about how serious they are about climate change. Because if you start mainstreaming these things into your processes and systems, that demonstrates that not only are you advocating for greater climate change assistance, but you're also undertaking to modify your own processes as well, so that it has that as a priority objective in your overall processes and systems. I think I might leave it at that because we're short on time, and hand it over back to Holly. Thank you.
Shada, you just heard, the PFM expert point of view. So we would like to hear how, a climate expert is seeing the benefits of the PEFA climate assessment for a government. So you were part of the team in Jordan. And then Richard highlighted that, the processes or the good practices, they're emerging. And we heard that before, during the discussion. So we would like to hear your views on this. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Holly Tiana, first of all, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and good evening from Oman to everyone. And it's a pleasure to have heard Richard's experience. To be honest, as you mentioned, Holly, I'm part of the team that did the PEFA climate for Jordan. My other two colleagues are PFM experts. So I felt like I might be the kind of odd one out in the group, and they would, ask me the least. But actually, I ended up finding that we really complemented each other. I think the two perspectives were very much needed in the exercise. Jordan has been known to be somehow of a pioneer when it comes to applying new tools and methodologies. Jordan was one of the first countries in the region to have a climate change policy in 2013, a green growth plan in 2017. So I'm not surprised that Jordan also stepped up to try and do the PEFA climate. And I think this gives you an indication that the policy and regulatory framework in Jordan is conducive for us to be doing this exercise right now. So, Jordan does have a climate change bylaw, pretty good environmental renewable energy laws. But I think where there might be a gap and why this exercise was so timely is kind of that link between climate change and the PFM world. To me, this was a new world through this exercise. I think I was able to lend my perspective to my PFM colleagues, but also vice versa. And it's very clear to me now, actually, that even though we have these big plans and strategies, so we've got a green growth plan, an NDC action plan, I think for them to really become implemented in reality, we need this kind of mainstreaming to actually happen in the entire public pipeline of public development investments, process, so that the Ministry of Planning, the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment are all speaking the same language. When I came into the sector 15 years ago in Jordan, I felt that all of what we were talking about was mainly talked about at the Ministry of Environment. Everybody else thought this was kind of, climate change was this elite topic, not relevant to development, it's too complicated. But of course, 2020 and 2021, I think, was the perfect time to do this assessment because of this, regulatory maturity, but also because Jordan, and this is another exercise I took part in, was talking about green recovery. The Ministry of Planning requested a green recovery plan. And, the question was, how do we do green recovery? I think we had a good answer on the technical side. What are the key sectors, projects, emissions? Where do we focus on in mitigation, adaptation? I think we have that pretty much well studied and nailed in Jordan. I think what was not clear very much is, okay, how does our public financial system accommodate these plans, make it really part of, how do we divert national budgets in the right way? How do we make the most of national budgets? Of course, Jordan, as you know, also depends a lot on international financing and grants and supports. It is a country that hosts a lot of refugees. But, how do you make the most of this, the money that we have in our national system? And then I would say that the public financial realm becomes sort of a signal for further attracting of green finance by the private sector and by other international players. So, what I wanted to say is the timing was opportune because of the Green Recovery Plan, because of the, Jordan was embarking on updating its NDCs during this time. It was in the build-up to COP26. So there was interest in what we were doing, whether it's the Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Planning. We were really tackling a hot topic, no pun intended. And Jordan was already issuing its indicative executive program, which is like the list of projects for the next 2 years. And in it, there was a green pillar. So I'm happy to have been part of this kind of cross-fertilization, really, between Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Planning. They're starting to converge. We're all starting to see that this is becoming center of government agenda rather than just something, focused on the Ministry of Environment side. One thing I also wanted to say is that because this program and the team doing this in Jordan is actually under the World Bank, there was another complementary project being designed at the same time with the World Bank called the Program for Results for Jordan. A lot of the thing I noticed about PEFA Climate, and as Richard said, it's not meant to give recommendations, it's meant to take a snapshot of where we are. And by taking this snapshot, I think we are where Samoa was, of course, our report is not final. We're still in those C's and D's, but I'm very excited to see where Jordan stands on this PEFA Climate in a few years. A lot of these indicators, I'm like, oh, I wish we were doing this next year. We would score so much better because it's a fast changing policy landscape. Things like, the definition of climate expenditure is going to be issued officially end of this year. And this is an indicator by that Program for Results under the World Bank, for example. This whole public investment management system, starting with the Ministry of Planning, we have an MRV system, a monitoring, reporting, verification for climate change. How is that IT system? How are all the ministries going to gain capacity to input their projects there? How are projects going to be tagged properly as climate projects? All of this is going to evolve as we hopefully will see next time we do Climate PEFA in Jordan. So I think that's what I wanted to say in general in terms of what the exercise meant for us. And I'm really looking forward to finalizing the report. Of course, we're in the peer review process right now. So it was a very important learning experience for the team, but also for the ministries who were engaged with us throughout the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard and Chada, for your insight about your experience with PEFA Climate. And so I take away the cross-fertilization, that you mentioned, the center of government agenda. Richard mentioned also like the fact that the policy landscape, and you built on this as well. And so I guess it closes well, in fact, what we have been saying about climate change during the last 2 days. So we will close the session here. Unfortunately, we don't have much time for questions. So and it's already late. We're past the time. I would like to thank all our speakers and leave the floor to Srini just for the closing remarks.
Thanks, Holly Tiana. And this marketplace discussion is simply the evidence. It is the evidence that probably there is no option. There are no excuses. The rich discussion indicates that globally what we have is everything needed for excellence in public financial management systems. We have the people, we have the global experts all over in the governments. We have the tools, techniques, and the frameworks and vast experiences. So this is the time probably to scale up PFM responses globally, and I expect that to happen. And from PFA Secretariat, we would do our best. We are just one email away to services@pfa.com. We are just one tweet away, one comment on LinkedIn away to reach out and connect with you and provide any support needed to countries, development partners in our own way to support this endeavor. With that, let me thank all the speakers and panelists at this brilliant marketplace event. This has been very interesting discussions around the 3 new products, and the 3 are just the 3 new. There are several others, and we look forward to many other events where we would be sharing our activities. Please tweet, share your feedback about the marketplace and the overall 20-year conference, which will inspire us and make us motivated to do many more such events. And thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.